I worked 7-5-hour weeks for our house while my girlfriend blew her savings on spa days. After she publicly called me lazy, I bought the house. Just for me. I, 28 male, have been with my girlfriend, let's call her Chloe, 27 female, for exactly 4 years. We've lived together for the last 2.5 years in a decent 2-bedroom apartment. Right from the start of our cohabitation, we had an arrangement where I paid 60% of the rent and utilities because I make a higher salary. That arrangement was actually her idea, by the way. She called it a proportional contribution, and honestly, I agreed with the logic. It made sense at the time, and I wanted us to build a life together without her feeling financially strained. About 18 months ago, we started talking very seriously about taking the next big step, buying a house. She was incredibly excited, sending me Zillow listings every night. I was just as excited. We sat down at our kitchen table, opened a spreadsheet, and made a concrete plan. The goal was to save aggressively for 2 solid years. We were aiming for a $50,000 down payment on a starter home in the $310,000 to $330,000 range. We agreed we would each contribute what we could, track our savings in separate accounts so we could visibly see our progress, but ultimately work toward the exact same goal. Because of our income disparity, her target was to save $20,000. My target was $30,000. Here is exactly where things started going completely sideways. I took our plan to heart and took on extra work immediately. My regular job is in logistics management at a major distribution center. It pays a decent salary and has solid health benefits, but it's not exactly making it rain. To hit my $30,000 target within the 2-year timeframe, I started picking up overtime whenever and wherever it was available. I covered for people who went on vacation. I took grueling weekend shifts during our peak holiday seasons. I volunteered for the early morning receiving shifts that nobody else wanted. For the last 8 months especially, I have been averaging 70 to 75-hour work weeks, sometimes even more when supply chain bottlenecks hit. I was tired. Not just need a cup of coffee tired, but bone-deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. I developed chronic lower back pain from standing on concrete warehouse floors for 14 hours a day. I missed my own sister's wedding rehearsal dinner because of a mandatory overtime shift. I skipped my best friend's 30th birthday weekend trip. But every time my alarm went off at 4 a.m., I kept telling myself it was temporary. We were building something real. A foundation. Our future. My girlfriend, meanwhile, was supposed to be saving aggressively too. And technically, she was putting money away. But her definition of saving aggressively and mine turned out to be existing in 2 entirely different universes. She would put money into her savings account on payday, sure. But then she would constantly pull from it for emergencies that were absolutely not emergencies. There was a 3-day music festival she simply couldn't miss because all her college friends were going, and she needed VIP tickets for her mental health. There was a brand new $250 designer winter coat because her perfectly fine one from last year was suddenly dated and out of cycle. There was a wellness spa weekend for her sister's birthday that somehow ended up costing her $450. Every single time I gently brought it up, she would wave me off and say she'd just make it up the next month by cutting back on groceries or coffee. She never did. I didn't say anything forceful for a long time. Partly because I was physically too exhausted to initiate a fight, and partly because I figured she would eventually get it together. She's an adult. She knows what the goal is. She was the one who wanted the house so badly. Then, about 3 weeks ago, everything shattered. I came home on a Saturday evening after a brutal 14-hour shift. I had been on my feet all day dealing with a massive inventory crisis and a broken forklift. Every muscle in my body ached. I walked through the front door, dropped my heavy keys on the console table, and found Chloe lounging on the couch. She had a glowing green face mask on, a glass of wine in her hand, and was binge-watching a true crime documentary on Netflix. "Hey," I said, my voice hoarse. "Incredibly long day." She barely even looked up from the screen. "There's leftover Thai food in the fridge." I didn't argue. I went to the kitchen, heated up the cold noodles in the microwave, and walked back into the living room. I sat down heavily on the armchair next to the couch. She finally paused her show and looked over at me. "You look rough," she said. It wasn't said with concern or empathy. It was purely observational, like she was commenting on the weather. "I feel rough," I admitted, rubbing my face. "But it's fine. Another few months of this grind and we'll finally have enough for the deposit." She shifted uncomfortably on the couch and nodded slowly. "Yeah, about that. I was actually looking at the numbers yesterday and I think we should probably push the timeline back a bit." I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. "Push it back? Why? We're almost at the finish line." "I know, but I just haven't been able to save as much as I originally planned. You know how it is. Things came up. Life is expensive right now. Life." I took a very deep, very slow breath, trying to keep my heart rate down. "Okay. Exactly how much do you have saved right now?" She hesitated, picking at her fingernails. "Like, 12,000. You. 12,000? I stared at her, completely stunned. 18 months of supposed aggressive saving, and she had $12,000. I had been literally killing my body for 8 months, working double shifts, and I had already hit my $30,000 target 3 weeks ahead of schedule. She was $8,000 short of her much smaller goal. I didn't yell. I didn't even raise my voice, I just looked at her and calmly asked, "Okay, so what is your plan to make up that massive difference?" "Well," she started, looking slightly annoyed that I was pressing the issue. "I was thinking maybe you could just cover the gap, just temporarily. I'll pay you back once we're settled in the house and I'm not paying rent to a landlord anymore." That is the exact moment something inside my brain completely shifted. The tone of her voice. She wasn't asking me for a massive favor. She was assuming. She was expecting me to just magically produce another $8,000 to cover the money she blew on concerts and spa days, while I was destroying my physical health. "Let me think about it," I said quietly. I put my half-eaten food in the trash and went to bed at 8 p.m. I couldn't sleep a wink, but I desperately needed to not breathe the same air as her. The next day was Sunday. I dragged myself out of bed at 5 a.m. and worked yet another overtime shift. When I finally got home around 3 p.m., the apartment was empty. She was out with her friends. I didn't think much of it, just thankful for the quiet, until my phone buzzed on the coffee table with a notification from Instagram. Chloe had posted a photo. It was a perfectly filtered, aesthetic shot of 2 mimosas and avocado toast at a high-end downtown brunch spot. The caption read, "When your boyfriend doesn't even try anymore. Self-care Sunday with the girls because someone has to prioritize my happiness since he won't." I sat in my dirty work boots and stared at my phone screen for probably 10 minutes straight. By the time I saw it, the post already had over 400 likes and 60 comments. All of them were from her college friends, our mutual acquaintances, and her coworkers. They were sending heart emojis. They were commenting things like, "You deserve a king, babe," and, "Drop the dead weight, queen," and, "If he wanted to, he would." I had worked 75-hour weeks for 8 straight months. I had missed holidays with my own parents. I had skipped my best friend's milestone birthday. I had developed a permanent knot in my lower back. All so we could have a house, our house. And she sat at a $50 a head brunch, spending more of the money she was supposed to be saving, and publicly broadcasted to hundreds of people that I didn't try anymore. Because I was too physically exhausted to take her to a fancy breakfast. I didn't comment on the post. I didn't text her angrily. I didn't say a single word. Instead, I opened my laptop and logged into my banking portal. I looked at the $30,000 sitting in my high-yield savings account. I thought about the sweat, the missed sleep, the cold mornings, and the absolute sacrifice it took to get that number on the screen. Then, I closed the laptop and made 3 very important phone calls. First, I called my buddy Dave, who works as a senior mortgage broker. I asked him, purely hypothetically, what kind of house I could afford entirely on my own. He ran some quick numbers through his system. With my excellent credit score, 0 debt, and my inflated income from all the overtime, he told me I could easily qualify for around $260,000 with my $30,000 down payment. It wouldn't be the big, modern house we had been planning on, but it would be a house. My house. Second, I called the real estate agent Chloe and I had been casually in contact with during our joint search. I told her the situation had changed and I was now exclusively looking solo. I gave her my new budget. She said she actually had a few older properties in my price range and could show them to me during my lunch breaks that week. Third, I transferred my entire $30,000 into a completely separate, brand new account at a different bank. Untouchable. Invisible. Mine. By Wednesday, I walked through a small, older 3-bedroom craftsman-style house. It needed cosmetic work. The paint was hideous, the carpets were old but the bones were incredibly solid, the roof was new, and it had a great backyard. I put an offer in that afternoon. By Friday morning, my offer was officially accepted. I didn't breathe a word of this to Chloe. She came home Friday night in a fantastic mood, dropping her bags and launching into a long, dramatic story about some petty gossip at her office. I sat on the couch, listened, nodded at the appropriate times, and waited patiently for her to completely run out of steam. "Hey," I said quietly when she finally finished talking. "I actually need to tell you something." "What's up?" she asked, kicking off her shoes. "I put an offer on a house this week. It was accepted this morning." Her face did this bizarre, rapid-fire morphing thing. First absolute confusion, then massive excitement, then confusion again. "Wait, what? Are you serious? We weren't supposed to actually start touring places until next month. Did you find something amazing off-market? Oh my God, let me see the Zillow listing right now." She reached for her phone. "It's not for us," I said, my voice dead calm. "It's for me. I am buying it alone." The silence that instantly filled the apartment was so heavy it was almost physical. You could have heard a pin drop on the carpet. "What do you mean, alone?" she whispered, her smile completely vanishing. "I mean exactly that. I am buying a house with my money, The money I saved by working myself into the ground. You are not on the mortgage application. You will not be on the deed. She actually laughed. A sharp, nervous sound. Okay, very funny. You got me. Seriously, show me the house. I am not joking, Chloe. After your little Instagram post on Sunday, I realized we have fundamentally different definitions of what trying looks like in a relationship. So, I decided to just try for myself instead. All the blood drained from her face, leaving her pale, before a dark red flush crept up her neck. My Instagram post? Are you kidding me? That was just venting. Literally everyone vents online. You're overreacting. You told 400 people that I don't try anymore. You did this while I was recovering from working 75-hour weeks for 8 months straight to buy you a house. You did this while you spent your portion of our down payment on spa weekends, designer coats, and VIP concert tickets. I cannot believe you are making this about money, she yelled, her voice echoing in the small room. We are supposed to be partners. You're supposed to support me. Partners contribute equally, or at the very least, they try to. You contributed $12,000 in a public, humiliating accusation that I am a lazy boyfriend. I contributed $30,000 in chronic physical exhaustion. That is not a partnership. That is parasitism. She started crying. Hard, ugly, hyperventilating tears. You can't just do this. We had a life plan. You can't just unilaterally change the entire plan without even talking to me. You changed the plan the second you decided that saving for our future was optional. I replied, standing up. I am just responding logically to the situation you created. The lease for this apartment is in both of our names. It renews in exactly 4 months. I will continue to cover my 60% portion until the lease ends. But after that, you will need to figure out your own living situation. Because I am moving into my house. She grabbed her phone off the counter, screamed that I was a psychopathic narcissist, and stormed into the bedroom, violently slamming the door so hard the picture frames rattled. The next few days were ice cold. She barely spoke to me, only emerging from the bedroom to make loud, pointed comments into the air about how some people abandon the ones they love when things get mildly difficult. Then, about a week later, she actually tried to buy a house on her own to prove a point. I only know this because the mortgage broker she went to a different agency, not my buddy Dave, is apparently married to someone who works in my logistics office. Word gets around fast. She confidently applied for a mortgage using her $12,000 down payment and her base income from her admin job. She got absolutely laughed out of the room. She was declined instantly. Not only was her down payment completely insufficient for the loan amount she was demanding, but her debt-to-income ratio was completely destroyed because of her high car payment and the massive credit card debt she had secretly racked up funding her aesthetic lifestyle. The bank explicitly told her she needed either triple the down payment or a wealthy cosigner. She obviously had neither. Eat it. Just to answer a few common questions from the comments. No, we did not have a joint bank account. Thank God. We kept our finances strictly separate and just updated each other on our totals. And yes, my name is the primary on the current apartment lease, but she is legally listed as a co-tenant, which is why I gave her the 4-month notice instead of just kicking her out immediately. Update 1, 2 weeks later. Things have escalated in ways I completely expected, and in ways I absolutely did not. First, the expected stuff. Chloe is furious. Like, genuinely, terrifyingly seething. She has been alternating between giving me the silent treatment and initiating explosive, crying arguments in the kitchen. The arguments all follow the exact same delusional pattern. I betrayed her, I sabotaged our shared future, and I am financially abusive for not sharing my hard-earned savings with her. That last accusation really got under my skin. Financially abusive? I looked her dead in the eye during one of these screaming matches and said, I worked 75-hour weeks, saved every single penny I made. And I'm the abusive one because I won't hand over 30 grand to a person who publicly mocked my exhaustion to her friends? I told her plainly, I am not stopping you from buying a house, Chloe. I'm just not buying 1 times for times you. She didn't have a single coherent response to that. She just threw a couch pillow at my head and locked herself in the bathroom. Second, the unexpected stuff. Her family got heavily involved. Her mother actually called me on my cell phone. Not a text, a direct phone call. Old school. I heard exactly what is happening. Her mother snapped the second I answered. No hello, no greeting. Okay, I said calmly. You are really going to leave my daughter homeless on the street over a silly little social media post? Are you really that fragile? I am not leaving her homeless, ma'am. We have a secure apartment with 4 months left on a paid lease. She has plenty of time to figure out her next steps, exactly the same as any functioning adult. She has been counting on this house for 2 years. You know that. Her mother yelled. No, I corrected her. She has been counting on times my money times for 2 years. There is a massive difference. Her mom went completely quiet for a few seconds. Then she lowered her voice and hissed, You've always thought you were so much better than her, haven't you? I actually almost laughed out loud. No, ma'am, I thought we were equals. She is the one who posted publicly that I wasn't enough for her. I am simply taking her at her word. I hung up the phone and blocked her number. Her father, weirdly enough, has stayed entirely out of the crossfire. From what I've gathered through the grapevine, he actually thinks Chloe was dead wrong for the Instagram post, but he also thinks I am overreacting by buying the house secretly. Classic fence sitter. At least he isn't actively attacking me. Her friends, however, have been an absolute nightmare. One of them, her best friend since college named Sarah, sent me a massive, unhinged DM on Instagram. It was literally a bullet-pointed list of why I was a toxic, narcissistic partner. Highlights included: not supporting Chloe's emotional needs during a stressful economic climate, prioritizing capitalist work culture over the emotional health of the relationship, weaponizing your financial stability as a form of patriarchal control. I screenshotted the ridiculous message, sent it to my buddy Dave with the caption, "I didn't know working overtime and saving money was a patriarchal weapon," and then blocked Sarah. Dave sent back a skull emoji and said I should get that printed on a coffee mug for my new house. Speaking of the house, the closing is officially scheduled for next month. The professional inspection came back mostly clean. There was some minor electrical stuff in the basement and a wonky water heater, but the seller eagerly agreed to credit me $3,000 at closing to fix it. I have already started drawing up floor plans for what I'm going to do with each room. The spare bedroom with the big window is going to be my dedicated home office. The unfinished basement has incredible potential for a woodworking shop. It's small, it's older, but it is entirely mine. Meanwhile, Chloe, I guess I should officially start calling her my ex-girlfriend at this point, even though we haven't formally sat down and said the words "we are broken up" has been frantically scrambling. She asked her parents for a massive loan to supplement her down payment so she could try the bank again. They flat out said no. Apparently, they are already financially bailing out her older brother with some crippling gambling debt and literally cannot stretch their finances any further. She then asked her younger sister, who is still aggressively paying off her nursing school student loans. Her sister literally laughed in her face. Then, 2 nights ago, Chloe came to me with a proposal. She actually sat me down at the kitchen table with this whole corporate presentation vibe. Seriously, she had a legal pad with notes written on it. "Okay," she started, using her best professional voice. "I know things have been incredibly tense between us, but I have an idea that could genuinely work for both of us. A compromise." I crossed my arms. "I'm listening. What if I move into your new house with you? Not as an owner. I know you want the deed in your name, just as a tenant. I will pay you rent, fair market rate of course, and we can use the time to see if we can rebuild our relationship in a new environment. It's not ideal for me, but it's highly practical for both of us." I stared at her, genuinely trying to comprehend the sheer audacity. "You want to move into the house I bought?" "The house I bought with the money I saved while you were broadcasting to the entire internet about how I don't try hard enough? I already said I was sorry about that stupid post." She deflected quickly. "When?" I asked, leaning forward. She blinked, taken aback. "What? When exactly did you apologize?" Because I have a pretty good memory, and I absolutely do not remember hearing the words "I am sorry" leave your mouth. She opened her mouth, closed it, and opened it again like a fish. I thought it was implied. I deleted the post, didn't I? An apology isn't implied, Chloe. And no, you are absolutely not moving into my house. Under any circumstances. That house is mine. It is the one single good thing to come out of this entire miserable mess, and I am not going to let you infiltrate it and turn it into another situation where I do all the heavy lifting and you complain about the results. She dramatically threw her legal pad onto the table, scattering her pens. "You are being so unbelievably petty about this. It was one single post." "It wasn't just a post." I corrected her, keeping my voice terrifyingly calm. "It was a post that showed me exactly how you view our entire relationship. You see me as a utility. Someone who should be eternally grateful you're gracing him with your presence. Someone who needs to constantly try harder to deserve you. I spent 8 months trying as hard as I physically, biologically could. I destroyed my back for you. And your response was to mock me to everyone you know. That's not a mistake. That is a revelation of who you actually are." She didn't cry this time. Her face just went completely stone cold. "Fine. I will find my own place. But good luck finding someone else who puts up with your boring, workaholic nonsense. I would honestly rather be alone than be with someone who resents me for wanting to enjoy my life." She slept on the lumpy living room couch that night. It was the first time since we moved in together that we didn't share a bed. Date 2. 3 weeks later. Things have finally reached a breaking point, and honestly, as exhausting as it has been, I am profoundly relieved that it is almost over. First off, I officially closed on the house. I signed a mountain of paperwork, got the shiny new keys, drove straight over, and walked through my completely empty living room. I just stood there in the silence for about 20 minutes, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. It is real. It is mine. Nobody can take it from me. The first night, I slept on a cheap inflatable air mattress on the floor because I hadn't moved any of my actual furniture yet. I didn't care at all. It was the deepest, most peaceful sleep I have had in over a year. Second, my now officially ex-girlfriend has been on an absolute crusade to make sure everyone in our city knows her wildly distorted version of events. She took to Instagram again. This time, she posted a massive, multi-paragraph essay about surviving financial abuse in modern relationships and how toxic partners use money as a weapon to control and isolate independent women. She didn't use my name, but anyone who knows us knows exactly who she was talking about. The comments were a bit more split this time around. Her closest echo chamber friends rallied with the usual supportive garbage, but I noticed a lot of our mutual acquaintances staying completely quiet. One of my coworkers who unfortunately still follows her sent me a screenshot with the caption, "Is she clinically insane? You literally work yourself half to death every week." I didn't respond to the post publicly. I didn't jump into her comments to defend myself. The people who actually matter in my life know the truth. The people who don't matter can believe whatever fictional narrative they want. But here is the thing that actually shocked me. Her boss saw the posts. My ex works at a mid-size corporate marketing firm. It is a highly professional environment that deals with very conservative corporate clients. Her boss, let's call her Karen, apparently follows Chloe on Instagram. It was probably some forced team building HR initiative that happened years ago. But when you post publicly, repeatedly, about financial abuse and toxic relationships with enough identifying details that your coworkers can easily figure out who you're talking about, it tends to raise massive red flags in a corporate setting. Karen called Chloe into a private closed-door meeting to check in on her well-being. Standard HR protocol when an employee seems unstable online. Chloe, completely misreading the room and thinking this was a sympathy play, unloaded the entire dramatic story to her boss. She talked about how her boyfriend had cruelly abandoned her, how she was struggling financially, and how stressed and traumatized she was by my betrayal. Karen listened politely, took notes, and then gently mentioned that the company had a very robust employee assistance program if Chloe needed professional counseling or financial guidance. Very professional, very supportive on the surface. And then, according to a mutual friend who works in the accounting department at that same company, Karen quietly started reassigning all of Chloe's client-facing responsibilities to other team members. It wasn't officially documented as a demotion, but it was absolutely a massive step back in her career. The official corporate reason given was reducing her workload to support her during a difficult personal transition. The real reason, which everyone in the office immediately understood, was that no marketing firm wants an employee who is publicly airing messy, vindictive personal drama to be the polished face of their multi-million-dollar brand partnerships. She is still employed, she is still getting her base salary, but she has been completely sidelined from all the high commission accounts, and she knows exactly why. I didn't plan for any of that to happen. I didn't call her boss. I didn't sabotage her. It is just what naturally happens when you weaponize your social media to ruin someone's reputation and conveniently forget that your professional life and your personal life are not perfectly sealed boxes. Third, the apartment situation has finally concluded. We officially had the final, undeniable breakup conversation about a week ago. She swallowed her pride and asked me one last time if I was really, truly serious about not letting her move into the spare room of my house. I said yes, I am absolutely serious. She then asked if I would at least give her $2,000 to help cover the security deposit for a new apartment since she was blindsided by this. I said absolutely not. She screamed that I was a heartless monster. I told her I called it having boundaries. She moved out completely last week. She managed to find a cramped one-bedroom apartment that she could barely afford on her own. It is significantly smaller than what she wanted. It is in a much less convenient location with terrible parking, and she actually had to resort to getting a roommate off the internet to make the monthly numbers work. She is absolutely furious about the entire reality of her situation. This is entirely your fault. She spat at me while she was throwing her clothes into garbage bags. If you had just stuck to the original plan and not been so selfish, we would be moving into a beautiful house together right now. If you had stuck to the original savings plan and not broadcasted to the world that I don't try, we would be in a house together right now, I shot back. But you didn't. So here we are, actions have consequences. I cannot believe I wasted 4 years of my youth on you. She cried. I cannot believe I spent 8 months working 75-hour weeks destroying my spine for someone who thought I wasn't trying, I replied evenly. She didn't have anything to say to that. She just zipped up her bag and walked out. Fourth, her mortgage situation somehow got even worse. Before she signed the lease on the crappy apartment, she desperately tried 2 more independent lenders after the first bank rejected her. Both of them declined her application for the exact same reasons. The final loan officer actually sat her down and told her that if she could aggressively save for another 12 to 18 months, and completely pay down her revolving credit card debt, she would be in a much better shape to qualify for a tiny starter condo. 18 months of aggressive saving. Exactly what we were supposed to do together. Except now, she has to do it entirely alone, from a much more expensive apartment, while splitting rent with a stranger, and without my inflated income to act as a safety net for her spending habits. I heard through the grapevine that she completely broke down sobbing in her car when the last lender handed her the rejection paperwork. A small, weak part of me felt bad when I heard that. The part of me that remembered falling in love with her 4 years ago, making grand plans together, and genuinely believing we were building a beautiful life. But then I remember the Instagram post. I remember the 400 likes, the 60 comments, the chorus of, "You deserve a king" from people who had absolutely no idea how hard I was bleeding to give her the life she demanded. The sympathy faded incredibly fast after that. I am writing this final update from my new house. My house. It still feels surreal to type those words. The furniture is mostly set up now. I went a little budget on everything for now. I bought a second-hand couch off Facebook Marketplace, a basic metal bed frame from Amazon, and literally everything in my kitchen is from IKEA. But it is mine. I picked every single piece out myself. I didn't have to compromise on the aesthetic, and I didn't have to ask permission to buy a blue rug instead of a gray one. The spare bedroom is officially my home office. I talked to my boss at the logistics company, and I've already started working from home 2 days a week doing administrative routing, which has done absolute wonders for my chronic back pain and my general sanity. The 75-hour weeks are completely over. I am back to my normal 40-hour schedule, only picking up occasional overtime when I actually want a little extra disposable cash. My savings account took a massive hit with the down payment and closing costs, but it is rebuilding steadily. My stress levels are the lowest they have been in over 2 years. As for my ex, physical closure is a real thing. I actually helped her carry some of her heavier boxes out to her car on her final moving day. Not because I wanted to win her back, but because I am not a monster, and I wanted the physical, tangible closure of watching her pack up and leave. Watching her taillights disappear down the street was the exact closure I needed. She is living with that random roommate now. From what I've heard through our dwindling mutual friends, it is going disastrously. The roommate is apparently incredibly messy, loud, and constantly has her boyfriend over, which is deeply ironic because Chloe used to relentlessly complain about my obsessive tidiness when I would ask her to put her shoes in the closet. Her job situation has stabilized slightly, but she is still confined to the penalty box. She hasn't been given back any of the big client accounts, but she has been assigned to some internal, low-profile corporate projects. They are steady, but there are no bonuses involved. She seems to be keeping her head down professionally, which is probably the smartest thing she has done in months. She hasn't posted about me again. The last thing I saw on her Instagram before I permanently blocked her was a generic, pastel-colored motivational quote about new beginnings and leaving toxic energy behind. It got maybe 40 likes. The sympathy engagement from her friends seems to be rapidly dying down now that the drama is over. Her family has gone completely quiet, too. Her mother never reached out again after I hung up on her. Her father, however, sent me a surprising text about a week ago that just said, "I hope you're doing well, son. No hard feelings on my end. You did what you had to do." I genuinely appreciated that. I responded with a simple, "Thanks, sir. Same to you," and left it at that. One of her friends, not Sarah who sent me the toxic bullet points, but a different girl named Jessica, actually approached me to apologize. We ran into each other at a local coffee shop downtown, and she pulled me aside while I was waiting for my order. "I just wanted to say I am really sorry," Jessica said, looking incredibly uncomfortable. I totally believed her version of things at first, with the whole financial abuse narrative. But then, I heard more details about the down payment and the credit cards, and yeah. "I don't think you did anything wrong." "I appreciate that," I told her, taking my coffee. "I'm not looking for apologies from anyone. I just want to move on with my life in peace." "For what it's worth," Jessica added quietly, "she is really struggling right now, not just financially. I think she is finally realizing exactly how much she took you for granted." I didn't know what to say to that. I still don't, honestly. A dark part of me thinks she absolutely deserves to struggle to learn a lesson. A softer part of me remembers 4 years of good memories mixed in with the bad. But the biggest part of me just doesn't care anymore. And that apathy is incredibly freeing. Here is the absolute truth about this whole ridiculous mess. I don't feel like I got some grand, cinematic revenge. I didn't set out to maliciously punish her or ruin her life. I just simply decided to stop letting her benefit from my agonizing labor while she simultaneously complained about the quality of it. The consequences that followed, the humiliating mortgage rejections, the terrible roommate situation, the corporate job setback, those weren't things I actively did to her. Those were things that happened because her entire lifestyle was built on the expectation of my endless contributions. When I removed myself and my money from the equation, her math simply stopped working. That's not revenge. That is just reality. I have been spending a lot of time thinking about what I want next. Definitely not anything romantic. I am nowhere near ready to date again. But just life-wise, I have a solid foundation now. I can build literally anything from here. Maybe I will finish that basement this winter and finally set up the woodworking shop I've always wanted. Maybe I will plant a massive garden in the backyard next spring. There is a perfect sunny spot by the fence that would be incredible for growing tomatoes and peppers. Or maybe I will just sit on my back porch after work with a cold beer and enjoy the absolute, uninterrupted quiet. Last weekend, I had Dave over for the first time. We ordered 2 massive pizzas, drank some beers, and watched the football game on my cheap TV. He looked around at the mismatched thrift store furniture, the completely bare walls, and the moving boxes I still haven't unpacked in the corner, and he smiled. "Dude, this place is absolutely perfect for you." I looked around the room, and I realized he was 100% right. It is not perfect in the curated, aesthetic Pinterest sense that Chloe always obsessed over, but it is perfect in the sense that it is mine. Every single nail, every floorboard, every drop of paint. I built this, I earned this with my own blood, sweat, and tears. Nobody can ever post on the internet about how I didn't try hard enough, because the undeniable evidence of my immense effort is literally the roof over my head. And that feeling of security is worth infinitely more than any shallow validation from strangers on Instagram. I am not perfectly happy yet. There is still a lingering sense of grief heavily mixed in with the relief. 4 years is a very long time to invest your heart into something that ultimately completely falls apart. But I am getting there, day by day. The house is so peaceful at night. Sometimes I lie awake and think about how incredibly different things could have been if she had just appreciated what we were painstakingly building together, instead of complaining about the process. But she didn't. And I cannot change the past. All I can control is what I do next. Right now, what I'm doing is sitting on my squeaky, second-hand couch in my half-empty living room, typing this massive story out for strangers on Reddit. Tomorrow, I am going to buy a hammer and hang some pictures on the walls. Maybe I'll buy a houseplant. Start making this place look like someone actually lives and thrives here. Small steps, but they are forward ones. Thanks for reading all of this. And if you are ever in a situation where someone is happily taking your massive efforts for granted while publicly complaining that you aren't doing enough, trust me when I say this. Your contributions belong solely to you. You get to decide what you build with them. Build something beautiful for yourself. If you enjoyed this story, please hit that subscribe button. It really helps the channel out and allows us to bring you even more awesome stories. Thank you so much for watching. My mom denied food to a kid when we were all trapped. 4 days later, she tried to steal from him, but the tables turned, and her greed was exposed. I was helping as a student teacher for the 7th grade field trip when the bus journey home went bad. The privileged students laughed and made fun of scholarship student Eli Parker in the back. Kid murmured, "Did you see his shoes?" "My dad says mom cleans houses," said another. "Eli probably doesn't even have a dad," Lila Whitmore laughed. Up from my seat. "Hey, that's enough. Let's be kind to each other." Ms. Harper rolled her eyes from her seat. "Oh, relax, kids will be kids. Maybe if he wasn't so strange, they'd genuinely like him." The other parents joked. Eli gazed out the window, trying not to hear. When we entered the mountain tunnel, the bus rocked with a huge rumble. Dust from boulders falling behind and in front of us filled the tunnel, making all the youngsters scream. After it cleared, massive rubble blocked both ends, trapping us. Radio signal was absent when the driver attempted. Our phones too. "Don't worry," Mrs. Whitmore said. "They'll have us out in an hour." Yet an hour and 2 passed. In the evening, youngsters were famished. Mrs. Whitmore brought out lunch's leftover pizza boxes. She distributed them to each child, ignoring Eli. "Wait," I said. "Eli needs to eat too." He didn't pay for the field trip lunch," she complained. "No payment, no food." Hearing this was unbelievable. "Are you serious? We're trapped, and you're worried about $4? I offered Eli a piece. Mrs. Whitmore smacked my hand. I said no. Everyone else's parents paid. Why should he get special treatment? The other parents crossed their arms to support her. Eli took out water bottles, baby carrots, and snacks from his rucksack. "It's okay, ma'am. I have my own food." The group split shortly, me, Eli and the driver versus the privileged kids and parents. The privileged kids brought chips, candy, and drink and played on their phones while the parents claimed they'd leave shortly. They were wrong. We remained trapped for hours. Although we didn't hear drilling until day 1.5, we knew they were having problems removing the unstable material. By then, kids and parents who hadn't rationed were fighting. Mrs. Whitmore said assistance was imminent while her daughter cried for her phone charger. On day 2, the youngsters were too hungry and fatigued to cry or stir. As optimism faded, Eli rose up, opened his rucksack and carefully divided everything into tiny halves. He passed them to his students as he walked. "We can last." 5 bites and 1 sip per day, he whispered. I saw these pampered youngsters come to him with respect and follow his advice after mocking him for not having pizza. Eli got a fever on day 3 of being detained, just when things were improving. Everyone could hear his labored breathing. Let's take his rations, Mrs. Whitmore grinned. He's not going to make it anyway. The rest of us need to survive. What I heard was unbelievable, but what occurred next stunned me even more. Every child stood between them, gazing at her. He saved us, cried a girl. He shared everything he had when you wouldn't even give him pizza. Another child said, "You're a bad person." Her daughter concurred. Several parents participated, while the remainder shrugged and ordered her to stop. Even in poor light, Mrs. Whitmore's face was flushed. Have you all lost your mind? He gave you a few drops of water, and now you're on his side? Oh yeah? And what did you give us? Nothing, I said. Her lips opened, then closed when she couldn't argue. After she left, the kids returned to their rations and gave Eli little bits. One female handed him her last crackers. With the extra water they offered, I cooled his fever with wet cotton for hours. The kids took turns dozing, with some staying awake to watch Eli. Then light burst through. Rescue professionals looked in and were ready to carry us out one by one, but the kids wouldn't move until Eli was out. However, Mrs. Whitmore cornered me after we left. This isn't over, she yelled. She didn't realize that a conflict with me meant a class war. Mrs. Whitmore was ignored as paramedics pushed by her with a stretcher and medical bags to Eli. 2 knelt alongside him as a third took his pulse and temperature. Eli tried to dismiss them by stating he was all right, but his voice was nervous. The youngsters surrounded the stretcher, refusing to move when paramedics told them to. A tiny girl held Eli's hand tightly. Lila Whitmore blocked her mother's view with her arms crossed, as she always did. Other kids formed a tight circle around Eli, and I watched the paramedics exchange glances until one smiled and said they may ride near to the ambulance if they stayed careful. Mrs. Whitmore stared at me from 15 feet away with her arms crossed, twisting my gut. Some parents ignored her, looking at the ground or their phones. 2 parents who'd helped her in the tunnel stood over to the side, humiliated and talking. The paramedics carried Eli onto the stretcher, and the kids went with him to the ambulance, holding his hands and promising him he'd be okay. I followed them, and one paramedic inquired whether Eli was riding with someone since he was a child. I mentioned his mom was 1 hour and 30 minutes away and he shouldn't be alone. The paramedic nodded and helped me enter the ambulance as the youngsters waved farewell through the windows. We moved with sirens as the doors closed. As the temperature read dangerously high, I saw the 2 paramedics quickly insert an IV line into Eli's arm. Despite his heat, they blanketed him, saying his body temperature regulation was incorrect. Eli kept slipping in and out of awareness, closing his eyes many times before opening them again. Every time he woke up, he mumbled about dividing the crackers evenly and inquiring if everyone had a glass of water. One paramedic furrowed his eyebrows as I gently described Eli's rationing scheme. The paramedic shook his head and murmured about courageous youngsters. Eli appeared to struggle with each inhalation. The third bag dripped fluids into his arm while the paramedics watched his vital signs on a little gadget that beeped regularly. I held Eli's hand without the IV and told him everything will be okay. He faintly clutched my fingers before closing his eyes. Although the vehicle trembled after a bump, personnel focused on stabilizing Eli. When we arrived at the hospital, everything blurred. Once we entered the ER, at least 4 scrubbed staff members surrounded Eli's stretcher. They rushed him away quickly, yelling out medical phrases I didn't understand, and a nurse brought me to the waiting room. I felt lost and worthless as they vanished behind double doors. Another nurse with a clipboard asked for my contact details and patient relationship. I told him I was his field trip student instructor and that his mom was on her way but had a long drive. After taking detailed notes, the nurse asked me to narrate what happened. I told her about the tunnel collapse and Eli's day 3 illness. I received a bottle of water and a warm blanket around my shoulders. I opened the water bottle with shaky hands, unaware that I was chilly. I needed the nurse to screw off the cap. I sat in an uncomfortable plastic waiting room chair and gazed at the floor, not sure if I was shaking from the chilly tunnel or from all that had transpired. After 4 days of low emergency illumination, fluorescent lights were too bright. Others in the waiting area stared at me because I appeared filthy, weary, and coated with tunnel dust. I drank little sips of water and tightened the blanket to stop my hands from shaking. I heard heavy footsteps and saw Mark Sullivan approaching. I could see his tiredness on his face as he sighed on the chair next to me. Mark informed me he alerted the rescue coordinator about the tunnel incident. He told them how Mrs. Whitmore refused to share food and suggested they take Eli's rations when he got sick. He also informed them of how all the youngsters defended Eli against their parents. Mark stated the rescue coordinator took notes and sounded worried. I nodded when he asked if I was okay, but I wasn't sure. We sat silently for a while, too exhausted to communicate. Suddenly the waiting room doors opened, and a woman raced in, searching for me. Maria Parker was scared. She was crying, and a towering man, Carlos Ramirez, appeared behind her. Maria grabbed my hands and asked where her kid was and whether he was okay as they ran over. At the tunnel collapse and over the 4 days, I stood up and told everything calmly. Her face showed fear when I described the collapse and being trapped, gratitude when I explained how Eli shared his food with everyone, and anger when Mrs. Whitmore refused to share the pizza and later suggested they take Eli's rations. Carlos placed a hand on her shoulder as she tightened her grip on mine, his expression black with fury. She asked me to repeat Mrs. Whitmore wanting to remove food from her ill kid, like she couldn't believe it. I repeated it word for word, watching her digest the harshness. Carlos said something in Spanish that I didn't understand, but his tone was angry. Maria thanked me again for protecting her kid in the ambulance. She said she should have protected him and been there. I told her Eli was the bravest tunneler and protected everyone. That helped some. We waited together and Carlos held Maria while she sobbed onto his shoulder. Approximately 15 minutes later, a blue scrubs doctor summoned Eli through the double doors. Everyone sprang up and ran. Doctor smiled and said Eli will be okay, but he needed to stay overnight for monitoring and IV fluids. He was terribly dehydrated and agitated by the fever, but with care, he would recover. Now Maria cried from relief, not dread. Her hands covered her face, and Carlos held her close. I watched them hug each other as the doctor waited. After speaking again, Maria thanked the doctor and then me, stating she didn't know what would have occurred without me. I told her Eli rescued himself by being compassionate while others weren't. We could visit Eli once the doctor situated him in a room. About 25 minutes later, more individuals came at the hospital. The older lady accompanying Principal Lawson looked professional, so I knew she was Dr. Reed, the school administrator. Both looked fatigued and serious, perhaps from the rescue operation and concerned parents all day. Principal Lawson approached me in the waiting room and requested a few minutes alone. Dr. Reed followed us to a quieter area, and I could tell by their looks that they'd heard something, presumably from Mrs. Whitmore knowing her. Principal Lawson requested me to recount the 4 days in the tunnel, so I took a big breath and began. Before the collapse, youngsters mocked Eli's shoes and family condition on the bus. I then described the tunnel collapse, terror, and Mrs. Whitmore's refusal to give Eli any remaining pizza since his parents hadn't paid for the field trip meal. While I spoke, Principal Lawson took notes in a little notebook. I told them about Mrs. Whitmore slapping my pizza slice, the group breaking in two, and Eli distributing his meticulously rationed goods on day 2. As I recounted the children's hunger and tiredness, Dr. Reed's jaw tightened. On day 3, Eli suffered a fever and Mrs. Whitmore advised taking his rations. I told them every youngster stood between them and Eli, branded her a nasty person, and forbade her from coming near him. That astonished the superintendent, who opened her eyes. I concluded by saying the kids demanded Eli be rescued first and had changed their mind about him. Principal Lawson stopped writing and glanced at me, inquiring about time and witnesses. I confirmed that Mark Sullivan and the other parents and kids observed everything. The principal said they were questioning adults and children individually to understand what happened. She requested me to write a formal statement for their records, and I obliged instantly since the kids needed the truth. I wasn't going to allow Mrs. Whitmore's narrative bury these children's lessons from that tunnel about compassion and doing the right thing. The principal thanked me and promised to contact me regarding the written statement in a few days. After checking on Eli with his mom, they departed, and I could breathe easier. Eli was stable and his mom was present, so I went home. Someone called out behind me as I walked to my car in the hospital parking lot. A woman running with a microphone and camera operator caught my attention. She identified herself as Rachel Collins from the local news station and said they heard about the spectacular rescue and wanted to discuss the tunnel incident. I declined to respond, saying Eli and the kids had been through enough and I didn't want to start a media circus. Rachel kept asking questions as I went faster to my car, but I just said I had no remark and wanted to go. I secured my car and watched her give up and go back to the hospital. I sat there for a minute trying to understand what occurred while I started the engine with shaking hands. Back at my place, I struggled with my keys and entered. My modest kitchen looked the same when I left on the field trip days before, but it felt different. After placing my purse on the counter, I stood still. I was smacked by everything at once. After my legs gave out, I sank onto the kitchen floor with my back to the cabinet. The tears flowed fast and strong, making breathing difficult. 4 days in the tunnel. Eli's fever. Face of Mrs. Whitmore as she recommended removing his meal, kids standing between them, all of it weighed on my chest, cried till my throat ached and eyes swelled. After stopping, I stood up and cleaned my face in the sink. My phone kept lighting up on the counter then. I grabbed it, and my gut wrenched. 32 messages. I read them. Am I okay? My roommate asked. 3 other student instructors said they listened and supported me. Mom wants me to call her. Then came parental messages. This parent said I did the right thing by safeguarding all the kids. Another parent complimented me for opposing Mrs. Whitmore when no one else would. However, other messages appeared. A parent asked why I produced so much friction instead of honoring Mrs. Whitmore's parent volunteer coordinator decisions. Another remark suggested I should have realized I was a student teacher. I made things worse by questioning the folks in control, someone wrote. Sitting at my modest kitchen table, I scrolled. Though most responses were positive, the critical ones lingered with me. My phone rang, and I jumped. Caller ID mentioned my university supervisor. My palm shook in response. It was wonderful that she inquired how I was. She then asked me to attend a meeting tomorrow morning. She spoke carefully and neutrally, like she was attempting to hide her thoughts. That scared me more than if she had told me I was in trouble or fine. I promised to be there, and she gave me a time. After we hung up, I opened a blank document on my laptop. I had to record everything in sequence while it was fresh. Beginning with the bus trip and youngsters mocking Eli. The tunnel collapsed. Mrs. Whitmore resisting pizza sharing. On day 2, Eli divided his supplies. 3rd day fever. Take him rations, Mrs. Whitmore suggests. Kids supporting him. The rescue. 2 hours were spent writing to memorize every detail and word individuals said. Though my hands cramped from typing, I continued. After finishing, the manuscript was 7 pages. I saved and shut off my laptop. I got another text on my phone. This came from an unfamiliar parent. She stated that her kid returned home saying Eli saved everyone and I was courageous. She replied, "Thank you for showing the kids what real kindness looks like." I wanted to feel better after reading it, but I kept worrying about tomorrow's meeting. What if I was expelled from student teaching? This was required for certification. My teaching career would be impossible without it. Standing up to Mrs. Whitmore may cost me all I worked for. I got ready to sleep. Even though it was early, I felt exhausted. My entire body hurt. However, I couldn't sleep when I closed my eyes. My mind kept repeating the tunnel. Eli's expression as Mrs. Whitmore smacked the pizza out of my hand, the youngsters becoming thinner and quieter each day, Mrs. Whitmore's smile when she proposed stealing Eli's food. However, I remembered the kids rising up, everyone between Eli and the parents. Even Mrs. Whitmore's daughter called her terrible. Kids learnt something vital in that tunnel. They learnt that wealth doesn't confer superiority. They learnt genuine character comes up in tough times. They learnt to fight for what's right when it's scary. I saw Eli exchanging his carefully rationed goods with students who had mocked him days before. Could have kept all for himself. Nobody would have faulted him, but he didn't. Ensured everyone has something. That's brave. How generous. Seeing the kids absorb that lesson was worth my meeting tomorrow misfortune. Finally fell asleep at 2:30 a.m. My alarm went off too early. I drove to college in my best business clothing. As usual, the campus appeared the same, but passing through the parking lot changed me. My supervisor's office was on the 3rd level of the education building. I knocked, and she invited me in. I sat in the chair across from her desk at her request. She requested the entire story. Breathing deeply, I began speaking. I told her about the bullying on the bus before the collapse. Mrs. Whitmore pulling out the pizza and refusing to give Eli any because his mom hadn't paid. The group splitting into 2 sides. Eli sharing his supplies on day 2, his fever and Mrs. Whitmore's suggestion to take his rations, and the kids standing up and refusing to let anyone near him. The boss listened without interrupting. A tiny notepad held her notes. After I finished, she put her pen down and glanced at me. She claimed the school system asked me to stop student teaching while they investigated. My stomach fell quickly, making me dizzy. This might ruin my teaching certification. My supervisor may have seen my face since she swiftly added that it's usual protocol in any occurrence. She stated she thought I responded correctly and would include it in her report, but I couldn't return to the classroom until the inquiry was over. My voice was untrustworthy, so I nodded. She advised me to rest at home. She'd call me when she knew. I rose up and left her office without sobbing. My trek back to my car felt endless. Sat for a moment after entering. Then I checked my phone. 3 new messages. First, a dad thanked me for saving his son during the crisis. Second, a mom apologized for not criticizing Mrs. Whitmore during anything. Third, another parent said their daughter kept talking about how I stuck up for Eli. Read all 3 messages twice. After driving home, I tried to forget my future for the day. 2 days. I basically did schoolwork and distracted myself at my apartment. Then my phone rings. That was Principal Lawson. She invited me to school. Children were being interviewed about the tunnel incident and wanted me there. She said they were scared talking to authority figures. My presence may make them feel secure telling the truth. I agreed immediately. I got a morning time from her. I arrived at school 15 minutes early. The main office looked the same before the field excursion. My secretary smiled and pointed to the corridor. I saw Eli then. At the water fountain, he looked exhausted, yet healthy. Seeing me, he smiled slightly. He waved back. I suddenly had kids around me. All at once they talked about how afraid they were in the tunnel and how grateful everyone was safe. They pressed against me like they needed to verify my identity. Principal Lawson kindly returned the youngsters to the waiting area. She took me to her office. When we entered, a kind-eyed clipboard carrier stood up. She was presented by Principal Lawson as child psychologist Dr. Emily Shore. She made sure the students were comfortable during the interviews. I sat in a corner chair. Principal Lawson told me to be quiet during interviews, but the students could see me. That may help them relax. Blake, one of the loudest bus trolls of Eli, was the first to enter. He took the chair opposite Principal Lawson and Dr. Shore. He began speaking. He told them everything about the bus jokes, Mrs. Whitmore refusing to share the pizza, Eli splitting up his supplies, Mrs. Whitmore recommending they take Eli's food when he became sick, and all the kids getting up to stop her. Very honest and detailed. He didn't alter his appearance or leave anything out. The next youngster told the same story, then another. Though they remembered various specifics, the major events were the same. I listened in my corner to 7th graders be bolder and more honest than most adults. Then Lila Whitmore entered. She seemed anxious. She sat and plucked her nails. Dr. Shore asked her about the tunnel incident. The girl spoke softly. Eli was denied meals by her mother. She said the kids were becoming hungrier daily. She said Eli shared supplies. She mentioned her mother's advice to take his rations. She said she stood up with the other kids and called her mom terrible. After finishing, she cried, but not disturbed. She cried with relief, like a weight had been lifted. Principal Lawson thanked and released her. She approached me in the corner. She whispered that she explained her mother's behavior. She apologized for mocking Eli on the bus before everything transpired. I assured her that was acceptable and praised her honesty. Wiping her tears, she exited the office. Eli ranked last. He carefully sat down with his hands folded in his lap at the chair. Dr. Shore smiled and asked him to describe the tunnel incident. He began speaking quietly, yet clearly. He explained distributing his goods to everyone. He explained being ill, sweaty, and sleepy. He then said Mrs. Whitmore advised them to take his meal because he wouldn't make it. Dr. Shore leaned forward to inquire how he felt. Eli glanced down at his hands. He glanced up and stated he was afraid but grateful because the other kids stood up for him, which he had never experienced before. His voice wobbly as he uttered pals. In her notepad, Principal Lawson wrote. Dr. Shore commended Eli for his bravery. His smile was tiny as he left the office. The room became silent when he closed the door. Principal Lawson put down her pen and faced me. She said the children's accounts matched each other and Mark Sullivan and my reports. Every youngster narrated a similar narrative with a few details that made it more plausible. The evidence showed that Mrs. Whitmore created a hostile and dangerous crisis scenario. Repercussions awaited her. Her words made my stomach flip with relief and worry. I departed when she stood and shook my hand. 2 days later, my phone rang when I was studying psychology for an exam. A school board member presented himself as Thomas Keller. He said they were holding an emergency meeting the next week to discuss parent volunteer policy and the tunnel collapse. He invited me to speak on my supervising student teaching experience. My phone-holding hand tensed. Even though my heart was beating, I agreed quickly. He thanked me and said the meeting was next Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. That week seemed like walking through sludge. Every night I sat at my modest kitchen table to compose my statement. I carefully wrote and deleted and rewrote. I couldn't focus on anything but the meeting, so my university schoolwork piled up. I kept thinking worst-case situations since my teaching career was precarious. My mom phoned twice that week to say she was proud of me. My roommate gave me cookies and coffee without asking. I received long texts from 2 education program pals indicating they would have done the same thing. That support helped more than anyone realized, yet I was still sick with worry most of the time. Monday night, my phone rang again. Maria Parker's voice was thick like sobbing, yet cheerful. Eli was invited to 2 friends' houses for playdates last week, she said. She insisted she couldn't believe it, and that he'd never been so accepted. She cried out when she said seeing him make true friends meant everything. Eli deserved everything and more, I told her. She thanked me again and hung up. Sitting there with my phone, I wondered whether all had been worth it. Tuesday night came too soon. I drove to the school board headquarters clutching the steering wheel. The parking lot was full. People packed the conference room walls and filled every seat. Parents from the field trip were among the instructors and newcomers. Local news cameras set up in the rear corner. In a black suit, Mrs. Whitmore sat in the front row alongside her husband. He looked angry like her. Her tunnel-supporting parents sat around the room, appearing uncomfortable and avoiding eye contact. I took a seat in the center to calm my breathing. The school board members made their way to the large table in front. On the middle seat, Thomas Keller brought the meeting to order. Principal Lawson presented the investigative results first. A huge packet of documents was in front of her. She meticulously read all the children's testimonies. She then discussed Mark's report, my remarks, and what the other adults saw. Board members would offer questions every couple minutes when she paused. When she said Mrs. Whitmore suggested they take Eli's meals while he had fever, several board members' faces altered. One woman opened her mouth. A guy shook his head slowly. The consistent testimonies were devastating, and you could feel the atmosphere change as people realized this wasn't simply an argument, but something more serious. Principal Lawson sat down, and Thomas Keller summoned me. I rose up shakily and moved forward. My folded statement was in my pocket, but I didn't read it. Instead, I concentrated on what the children taught me in those 4 days about courage, empathy, and doing the right thing, even when adults don't. I stated that as a teacher, I must safeguard all children and display ethical behavior, which I did in that tunnel. Despite shaking palms, I kept my voice firm. After I concluded, numerous audience members nodded. Mr. Whitmore's spouse stood before I could seat. He claimed to be her lawyer and argued that she was making logical resource management decisions amid a crisis. He said, I undercut parental authority and made youngsters disdain their parents. His voice grew as he said. Keller raised his hand to stop him. He gently stated that stealing food from a sick child breaches any fair threshold. He said that the children's uprising against their parents revealed they had lost moral authority via their behaviors and weren't only being undermined. Some audience members started clapping before being instructed to stop. Then something unexpected happened. 3 parents rose. The first stated she wanted to support me and criticize Mrs. Whitmore. She felt guilty for staying mute in the tunnel when she should have spoken out. Tearing up, the second parent said virtually the same thing. Eli started sharing his meal when they all refused to help him, making the third parent humiliated. Seeing these privileged parents repent and recognize their sins, silenced the room. Mrs. Whitmore went crimson and gazed straight ahead, ignoring everyone. Maria Parker stood next, and everyone looked at her. When she told her about Eli coming home after the first week of school and kids making fun of his shoes, she looked frightened but spoke clearly. She said she works 2 jobs to pay for their flat and his school supplies. She tries her hardest, but there's never enough money for the other kids' pricey footwear. She shakily stated Eli stopped informing her about school after the first week because he didn't want her to feel terrible about not being able to purchase things. She then recounted the night they were rescued from the tunnel and how Eli couldn't stop talking about his new friends, and how the kids helped him while he was unwell. She claimed it was the first time in years her kid was thrilled about school. She stared at Mrs. Whitmore when she emphasized that affluent families shouldn't need a life-threatening catastrophe to treat scholarship kids like people. Once she sat down, the room fell quiet, and I observed several individuals wiping their eyes. Thomas Keller cleared his throat and requested a board vote on the suggestions. He carefully reviewed each one, starting with removing Mrs. Whitmore from all school volunteer roles. Every board member raised their hand in support, and Mrs. Whitmore's rapid air intake could be heard throughout the room. They then passed laws mandating parent volunteers to take equity and inclusion and emergency procedure training before chaperoning field trips or helping in classrooms. That vote was unanimous. A scholarship fund in Eli's honor to help pupils pay for field trips and school supplies was voted on last. Principal Lawson said the money would ensure no child had to choose between school activities and home bills. After the vote passed overwhelmingly, the audience cheered until someone reminded them it was an official meeting. Thomas Keller thanked everyone for coming and said that all new regulations will take effect immediately. He ended the meeting with a gavel boom. 3 board members approached me as I gathered my stuff. After shaking my hand, the first one informed me they were suggesting to my institution that I return to student teaching immediately. The second board member praised my handling of a difficult circumstance and asked me to teach in their district after graduation. Thomas Keller was the last to approach and drew me away from the others. He looked me in the eye and said what I did in that tunnel was brave and precisely what their district needed in a teacher. He noted that standing up to wealthy parents is difficult, but necessary when a child's well-being is at issue. I thanked him and said I did what every teacher should. He grinned and remarked that sadly, not all teachers would have chosen the same. He shook my hand again and left to go to Principal Lawson. I felt lighter than in days as I headed out the door when Mrs. Whitmore emerged. Her face was crimson and she looked like she may burst. She said I wrecked her reputation in this town, cost her friendships, and nobody would trust her again. People stared at us as her voice grew louder. I started to answer, but 3 more parents intervened. One begged Mrs. Whitmore to leave me alone, and another advised her to take responsibility for her actions instead of blaming others. The third parent noted that I didn't make her advise withholding food from a sick child or refuse to share pizza. Mrs. Whitmore turned around and stormed to her car, her face turning redder. 3 parents turned to me and apologized for not opposing her sooner. One mom was ashamed that her children had more guts than she did to expose her their wrongdoing. After reaching my car, I sat there for a few minutes, exhaling and processing everything. When I started the engine, my hands were trembling from tiredness. Due of meeting replays, I drove home in autopilot, scarcely paying attention to the road. Once at my place, I flopped on my couch and stared at nothing. Then I checked my phone and found a university supervisor email. My heart raced when I opened it. The first sentence indicated I could return to student teaching next week, and I cried with relief. She concluded with a personal remark, stating she was proud of how I handled an impossible circumstance with integrity and concern for my kids. She wrote that the school board's recommendation was important and that she never disputed my tunnel decisions. After verifying the email 3 times, I relaxed for the first time since the rescue. The next morning, a stranger stopped me in the fruit area as I shopped for necessities. She knew me from tunnel rescue footage and wanted to shake my hand. She informed me her daughter was in 3rd grade at the same school and that she was delighted instructors like me would safeguard all students equally. I uncomfortably thanked her and left, but it occurred twice more before I reached the checkout. The checkout clerk mentioned watching the school board meeting on the local news last night. The station reported on the policy changes without naming anyone, but everyone in town understood what happened and who was involved. Walking around the store, I saw people pointing and murmuring. It seemed odd to be recognized for something so new and raw. Older man stopped me at the exit to say I did well. His grandson was in Eli's class. His grandson told him how Eli rescued everyone by sharing his food, and how the youngsters learnt that kindness is more important than wealth. I returned to school the next Monday, apprehensive about how the pupils would react to me. I paused at the doorway of the 7th grade classroom because the students had produced a giant welcome back banner that covered the front wall. It said, "We missed you," in huge colorful letters, and every kid wrote their name, including Eli. After seeing me, the kids cheered and clapped, and Eli smiled from his place in the center of the room instead of in the front. Students went up to hug me and started raving about how delighted I was back and how dull the substitute instructor was. Watching Eli laugh with the youngsters seated next to him and how readily they included him in their discussion made my throat tighten. He looked at me and waved briefly. It was worth it to watch him finally belong instead of being marginalized. My cooperating teacher took me to her classroom for lunchtime conversation. She says she heard everything at the tunnel and school board meeting. She praised my moral bravery and said teaching is more than lesson plans and exam scores. She said many instructors must choose between what's easy and what's right, and I passed that exam when it counted. She noted that she had taught for 14 years and witnessed many student teachers who knew their curriculum but didn't realize that defending pupils often requires standing up to strong individuals. She sent a good reference letter for my certification portfolio and was delighted to have me in her classroom. I spent so much time thinking that addressing Mrs. Whitmore would damage my teaching career that her remarks meant more to me than she probably understood. Over the following few weeks, Eli transformed in ways that appeared almost magical, but I knew it was just him feeling comfortable enough to be himself. He began raising his hand in class and always gave intelligent, well-reasoned responses. Other youngsters asked him to be their group project partner because they trusted his leadership and recalled how he managed the tunnel ration sharing. In the first month I was back, he was asked to 2 birthday parties, and his mom told me he spent an hour choosing gifts to show his pals he cared. Eli was readily included in recess chats and activities, changing the classroom dynamic. One lunchtime, Lila Whitmore and Eli's gang were giggling over something. The transformation wasn't charity or pity, but true friendship based on respect garnered over their darkest 4 days. While her classmates left for their buses one day, Lila Whitmore waited. She nervously wanted to talk to me at my desk. I answered her yes, and she apologized again for her bullying before the tunnel collapsed. She stated she had been thinking about why she acted that way and realized she was just repeating what she heard at home without inquiry. She said she had grown used to her mom's comments regarding scholarship kids and poor households. But after seeing Eli save everyone by sharing his food while her mom refused to assist, she realized her mom was wrong in many things. She apologized for being harsh to Eli and stated she was trying to improve. I told her that admitting our mistakes and changing is what counts most, and I was proud of her for thinking critically instead of taking adults' advice. She laughed and said Eli was great once you got to know him and she wished she had realized that sooner. A few weeks later, the school system invited me to discuss their new volunteer training program. They wanted my perspective on equity and inclusion since I was in the tunnel seeing everything happen. 3 administrators and a curriculum expert asked me detailed questions about what went wrong and how to prevent it in a conference room. I mentioned how Mrs. Whitmore's beliefs regarding scholarship kids were obvious on the bus before the crash and became hazardous when resources were few. They took thorough notes and asked me to develop scenarios and discussion questions that would force participants to address their biases against economically diverse pupils. I was surprised to be treated like an expert as a student instructor. But then I understood that tunnel experience taught me more than any textbook. Over the next month, I worked with curriculum specialists to create role-playing activities and reflection prompts to have parent volunteers consider how they treat all children, not just wealthy ones. Real tunnel instances were used without naming anybody. We required every volunteer to sign an agreement stating that they would treat every kid with decency and respect regardless of family income. The final 7-page training program contained video scenarios and small group conversations, and the school board authorized its immediate district-wide deployment. The thank you note came in my campus mailbox between courses on Tuesday afternoon. Maria Parker wrote me a little message on flowery stationery saying she never believed her son would be so happy and welcomed. Eli was photographed at a birthday celebration with 5 other youngsters giggling off camera. I had never seen Eli smile so much during his initial weeks of student teaching, when he ate alone at lunch and kept his head down in the corridors. His mom said that he now talked about his pals continuously, and was invited to 2 more parties next month. She sobbed at the first invitation since she had watched him have lunch alone and return home from school without someone to play with on weekends for years. She said she was glad every day that I stood up for him when it counted and hoped I had improved her son's life. I glanced at that card in my teaching binder when I was having a bad day, or wondered if I was cut out for this job. Our literary conversation about a novel whose main character was bullied was observed by my university supervisor on Friday morning. I picked the book because I wanted the kids to relate it to their tunnel experiences and discuss true friendship and courage. The supervisor took notes in the back of the classroom as students discussed my questions in small groups. As I listened to each group, I was astonished by their insightful and mature comments. They discussed sticking up for others even when it's scary, and how the tunnel taught them that kindness is more important than popularity or wealth. Eli eagerly engaged in his group's conversation, and the other kids listened to him with respect, asking him questions and elaborating on his ideas. My supervisor drew me aside after class and said I was doing well. She observed, "Your ability to build an inclusive classroom community is remarkable for someone so early in their career." I related literature to actual events to help kids develop empathy and critical thinking. She then informed me that school districts would be happy to have a teacher with my integrity and guts, and that she was glad to have me as a student teacher. Her remarks meant everything since I had spent nights thinking that opposing Mrs. Whitmore might harm my job prospects. Principal Lawson emailed me about the scholarship fund 2.5 months after the tunnel collapse. The community response was enormous, with families giving because they were affected and wanted to help Eli. The charity had generated enough money for 12 kids' field trips next year, and many local companies had pledged monthly payments. Principal Lawson stated that the school board was contemplating increasing the fund to include school supplies and extracurricular expenses so scholarship kids wouldn't lose out. She said the tunnel collapse was painful but revealed how economic constraints affect pupils daily. The email contained images from a fund awareness event where Eli and many classmates spoke about include everyone, regardless of family income. I looked at the photo of Eli confidently speaking at a microphone in front of a crowd of adults and thought about how far he'd come from that timid boy in the front of the bus. Saturday morning coffee shop near campus was where I met Mark Sullivan. When he noticed me, he waved me to his table while reading a newspaper and drinking black coffee near the window. We talked for about an hour about what occurred and how our lives had altered since the rescue. I learned the school system had requested him to teach other bus drivers on emergency and difficult parent situations. He claimed the training included medical emergencies and dealing with parents who override driving authority or endanger youngsters. Mark said witnessing the youngsters oppose their parents in the tunnel gave him hope for the future. Despite driving school buses for 10 years and seeing entitled parents and tormented kids, he had never witnessed youngsters acquire moral bravery like Eli's peers. He was delighted we were there to help those youngsters when they needed grown-ups at their side. He shook my hand and advised me to continue in teaching since the profession required individuals who knew that safeguarding pupils sometimes involves standing up to strong people. Before we left the coffee shop in late spring, Lila Whitmore joined the school's peer mentoring program and requested work with younger scholarship students. Her instructor stopped me to inform me about the change she saw. She claimed Lila Whitmore was one of the most empathic and inclusive kids in her class, often welcoming new students and correcting nasty comments. The instructor said the youngster openly discussed the tunnel experience and how it showed her mom was incorrect about impoverished households. She began to doubt other things her parents stated, rather than embracing them as truth. The instructor claimed she'd never seen a pupil change so much in so little time, and she thought the tunnel experience impacted her worldview. One lunchtime, I witnessed Lila Whitmore laugh and share snacks with a table of scholarship kids, making them feel important. It was hard to connect this sweet, attentive boy with the bus rider who said Eli probably didn't have a dad. The 7th grade class built a strong culture of inclusiveness and supporting one another as the year progressed. They chastised each other for classist comments or exclusions. I saw them aggressively engage everyone in activities and chats during recess. Eli's friends instantly asked her to lunch and included her in their weekend plans when a mid-year scholarship student transferred. That tunnel taught the youngsters something most people never learn: compassion and character matter more than money or prestige. They had witnessed Eli's kindness save them while the affluent parents provided nothing. This lesson stayed with them more than any classroom lecture. Other instructors noted that a 7th grade class without bullying or social hierarchy drama was rare. I knew it was because these students had been forced to evaluate their principals and select who they were. Eli was chosen to represent the school during an April district leadership meeting. The selection committee believed his heroism and charity amid the crisis typified the student leadership they wished to reward. His instructors recommended him. Eli was scared but delighted to present to hundreds of people. Several friends agreed to practice and critique his speech after school. In the library, I saw them give him honest advice and boost his confidence. Eli spoke on how the tunnel taught him that true leadership entails putting people first, even when you're terrified, unwell, or low on resources. He described how the other kids' companionship improved his life and made him feel valuable and significant. In his practice presentation, our class clapped for a minute and 3 kids cried. Eli discovered his voice and community, and witnessing him stand up and talk confidently was one of my finest moments as a student teacher. After getting my teaching credential in May, 3 districts offered me jobs within 2 weeks. Principal Lawson personally contacted to encourage me to apply for her school's next year position. She stated they needed instructors like me who knew education is more than test results and lesson plans. She said the tunnel event showed her I had the ethics and bravery to protect pupils even at my own expense, which were unusual and precious. She said the school valued my work and wanted me to stay. The greater salary and improved facilities made the other job offers appealing. But I kept thinking about Eli and his friends and how much I wanted to help them flourish. I accepted Principal Lawson's offer since I didn't want to teach elsewhere. I wanted to teach in a community that had shown they were eager to learn and improve for all pupils. In June, the school board recognized many tunnel responders and survivors at a public meeting. My actions during the collapse and my work designing the new volunteer training program earned me a Community Service Award from Thomas Keller at the front of the room. He delivered a brief speech on how I showed moral bravery under terrible circumstances and kept serving the community by preventing future student prejudice. I noticed Eli in the 3rd row with his classmates clapping loudly and gave me thumbs up as the audience applauded. Maria Parker sat alongside him crying, while Mark Sullivan grinned and clapped a few seats back. Some parents who backed Mrs. Whitmore in the tunnel were cheering, clearly thrilled with the acknowledgement. A glass plaque with my name was the reward. However, seeing that room full of people who understood why I did what I did and backed my decision to stand up for a youngster who needed someone was more important. Over the next 2 weeks, town heard about the tunnel incident. Mrs. Whitmore ceased attending school functions. Her pals stopped calling. Parents who used to drink coffee with her changed their minds. Another teacher told me she had taken her daughter out of school and relocated to a place an hour and a half away, where no one knew what she did. Some muttered that they felt sorry for her. Everyone makes errors under pressure. Most people felt she caused it by never apologizing or saying she was wrong about how she handled Eli throughout the crisis. The school rapidly carried on without her. 3 weeks after the rescue, Principal Lawson brought me into her office. A job offer letter was on her desk. I could teach next year if I wanted. She asked me because I had the moral leadership that produces outstanding teachers, those who always safeguard their children. The papers was signed the same day. The other employment offers paid more and had newer structures, but this community was eager to grow and change, which mattered most. Our 7th grade end-of-year celebration was in the gym on Friday afternoon. Parents crowded the bleachers as youngsters sat in folding chairs facing a tiny stage. Eli approached the microphone frightened, yet determined. Friends helped him practice his speech for weeks. He described the tunnel collapse and his fear when he got sick. He said sharing his meal was right even if he was hungry. Then he uttered what caused half the crowd to cry. He thanked everyone who defended him when Mrs. Whitmore requested his rations. He said he learnt that true friendship includes sticking up for others even when it's hard and that compassion counts more than money, parents, or neighborhood. The gym was hushed as he talked. Eli finished and moved away from the microphone, and every 7th grader stood up and clapped. Mom and Dad stood up. In the 3rd row, Lila Whitmore wiped tears from her cheeks while clapping harder than anybody. Students changed drastically from that bus journey to now. They defended Eli with everything they had after mocking his shoes. I felt proud knowing I helped them improve even somewhat. Maria Parker threw an end-of-year party at their flat the following Saturday. All Eli's new pals and their families were invited. I anticipated 5 or 6 attendees. 25 individuals filled that modest living room. Rich parents who looked down on Eli's neighborhood ate handmade tamales and laughed on the couch. Kids went about playing hallway games. Eli was in the midst, beaming larger than ever. His mom kept restocking food dishes and thanking guests. Nobody cared about the ancient dwelling and outdated furniture. They were just glad to celebrate Eli and the connections that built from something so horrific. I was grabbing extra napkins when Carlos Ramirez called me into the kitchen. He said Maria wept for nearly an hour when the first playdate invitation arrived. She feared for years that Eli would be lonely since they couldn't afford other things. He stated the tunnel collapse worried him more than ever. The aftermath provided Eli something he never had before: true friends who appreciated him for who he was, a community that valued him, and a place to belong. The harrowing days in the dark tunnel were worth it as Eli laughed with his classmates in the living area. School finished on a Tuesday in early June. Last week, I thought about how 4 days in a collapsing tunnel altered this town. 12 students might benefit from the scholarship fund next year. New volunteer procedures prevented youngsters from being treated like Eli. A group of 7th graders developed empathy without a school lecture. Choosing compassion above brutality was demonstrated to them. They saw how a poor person's charity saved lives. They learnt that doing the right thing is more important than fitting in. They never forgot those teachings. I prepared for my first year as a full instructor in July. Principal Lawson phoned to say I'd teach 8th grade, bringing Eli and his friends back. I could encourage their progress. Planning classes and arranging my classroom took weeks. I was delighted and terrified every time I entered the vacant room with my name on the door. Indeed, this was happening. Being a genuine teacher with my own pupils and classroom was my goal. Eli visited my classroom after 7th grade. He gave me a card from all his pals. A light-filled tunnel was drawn on the front. Eli wrote that I taught him to stand up for himself. That genuine instructors defend all children, not just the wealthy or easy. Having someone to support you in tough times makes all the difference. I kept that card in my desk drawer for daily viewing. 4 years after our tunnel disaster, the town organized a memorial service for a previous collapse that killed 3 workers. Our group was asked to discuss survival and strength. Eli rose first, taller and more assured. He taught that courage is assisting others while you're terrified. Next, some of his students shared how the experience taught them to recognize people's character beyond money and rank. Mark Sullivan describes seeing youngsters become heroes at night. I mentioned human generosity under strain and how disaster reveals people's true selves. Nearly 180 individuals listened silently. We completed to lengthy applause. Parent after parent thanked us for sharing our experience. They believed the tunnel made their kids more loving, less materialistic, and more motivated to fight injustice. Maria Parker stood with Carlos Ramirez and watched her son shake hands and spoke to people who ignored him. That fearful, lonely youngster from the bus front was gone. The young man in his place recognized his worth and had people who respected him. If individuals learn from bad things, they can improve. Parents approached me one by one after the wedding. The mother of a bus passenger who mocked Eli clutched my hand tightly. She told me her daughter talks differently now and observes when people are left out at school and spent her birthday money on supplies on a classmate who couldn't afford them. Another dad claimed his son stopped asking for fancy sneakers and started helping at the food bank. While thanking you, their voices trembled as they revealed how terrible those 4 days were and how thankful they were that anything good resulted from it. One woman sobbed while telling that her kids stood up to a bully last month because Eli taught them that individuals matter more than popularity. I listened to tale after story of youngsters who saw past money and prestige, became bolder and nicer, and chose empathy over cruelty. I saw daily changes the year after the collapse. Winter saw Eli's grades rise from just passing to honor. His instructors drew me aside during planning times to tell me he now participates in every topic, answers challenging questions, and volunteers to help struggling students with arithmetic. He joined the student council and created a lunch buddy program for lonely youngsters with older students. I saw him smiling at jokes and planning weekend hangouts in corridors with buddies. The nervous youngster who ate lunch alone in the library was gone. My teaching career took off unexpectedly. Principal Lawson brought me into her office one morning to inform me 4 new teachers wanted to watch my classroom. They heard I made every student feel cherished and protected and created a culture where students supported each other instead of tearing each other down. I was invited to speak at a district conference on inclusive classrooms and crisis management. Other schools copied our volunteer training program. Parents wanted their children in my class because they trusted me to treat everyone equally, regardless of income. I now understand teaching thanks to those 4 days in darkness. It goes beyond lesson plans, test results, and curricular requirements. It's about demonstrating kids' bravery in difficult and terrifying situations via your decisions. Proof that every student deserves safety, respect, and kindness, no matter what. Eli discovered his tribe and voice. These 7th graders learnt empathy that transformed them. I realized I needed to be a teacher who never turned away a child in need and speaks up even when strong people tell me to be silent. 2. She said the tunnel collapse was painful but revealed how economic constraints affect pupils daily. The email contained images from a fund awareness event where Eli and many classmates spoke about include everyone, regardless of family income. I looked at the photo of Eli confidently speaking at a microphone in front of a crowd of adults and thought about how far he'd come from that timid boy in the front of the bus. Saturday morning coffee shop near campus was where I met Mark Sullivan. When he noticed me, he waved me to his table while reading a newspaper and drinking black coffee near the window. We talked for about an hour about what occurred, and how our lives had altered since the rescue. I learned the school system had requested him to teach other bus drivers on emergency and difficult parent situations. He claimed the training included medical emergencies, and dealing with parents who override driving authority or endanger youngsters. Mark said witnessing the youngsters oppose their parents in the tunnel gave him hope for the future. Despite driving school buses for 10 years and seeing entitled parents and tormented kids, he had never witnessed youngsters acquire moral bravery like Eli's peers. He was delighted we were there to help those youngsters when they needed grown-ups at their side. He shook my hand and advised me to continue in teaching since the profession required individuals who knew that safeguarding pupils sometimes involves standing up to strong people. Before we left the coffee shop in late spring, Lila Whitmore joined the school's peer mentoring program and requested work with younger scholarship students. Her instructor stopped me to inform me about the change she saw. She claimed Lila Whitmore was one of the most empathic and inclusive kids in her class, often welcoming new students and correcting nasty comments. The instructor said the youngster openly discussed the tunnel experience and how it showed her her mom was incorrect about impoverished households. She began to doubt other things her parents stated, rather than embracing them as truth. The instructor claimed she'd never seen a pupil change so much in so little time, and she thought the tunnel experience impacted her worldview. One lunchtime, I witnessed Lila Whitmore laugh and share snacks with a table of scholarship kids, making them feel important. It was hard to connect this sweet, attentive boy with the bus rider who said Eli probably didn't have a dad. The 7th grade class built a strong culture of inclusiveness and supporting one another as the year progressed. They chastised each other for classist comments or exclusions. I saw them aggressively engage everyone in activities and chats during recess. Eli's friends instantly asked her to lunch and included her in their weekend plans when a mid-year scholarship student transferred. That tunnel taught the youngsters something most people never learn: compassion and character matter more than money or prestige. They had witnessed Eli's kindness save them while the affluent parents provided nothing. This lesson stayed with them more than any classroom lecture. Other instructors noted that a 7th grade class without bullying or social hierarchy drama was rare. I knew it was because these students had been forced to evaluate their principals and select who they were. Eli was chosen to represent the school during an April district leadership meeting. The selection committee believed his heroism and charity amid the crisis typified the student leadership they wished to reward. His instructors recommended him. Eli was scared but delighted to present to hundreds of people. Several friends agreed to practice and critique his speech after school. In the library, I saw them give him honest advice and boost his confidence. Eli spoke on how the tunnel taught him that true leadership entails putting people first, even when you're terrified, unwell, or low on resources. He described how the other kids' companionship improved his life and made him feel valuable and significant. In his practice presentation, our class clapped for a minute, and 3 kids cried. Eli discovered his voice and community, and witnessing him stand up and talk confidently was one of my finest moments as a student teacher. After getting my teaching credential in May, 3 districts offered me jobs within 2 weeks. Principal Lawson personally contacted to encourage me to apply for her school's next year position. She stated they needed instructors like me who knew education is more than test results and lesson plans. She said the tunnel event showed her I had the ethics and bravery to protect pupils even at my own expense, which were unusual and precious. She said the school valued my work and wanted me to stay. The greater salary and improved facilities made the other job offers appealing. But I kept thinking about Eli and his friends and how much I wanted to help them flourish. I accepted Principal Lawson's offer since I didn't want to teach elsewhere. I wanted to teach in a community that had shown they were eager to learn and improve for all pupils. In June, the school board recognized many tunnel responders and survivors at a public meeting. My actions during the collapse and my work designing the new volunteer training program earned me a Community Service Award from Thomas Keller at the front of the room. He delivered a brief speech on how I showed moral bravery under terrible circumstances and kept serving the community by preventing future student prejudice. I noticed Eli in the 3rd row with his classmates clapping loudly and gave me thumbs up as the audience applauded. Maria Parker sat alongside him crying, while Mark Sullivan grinned and clapped a few seats back. Some parents who backed Mrs. Whitmore in the tunnel were cheering, clearly thrilled with the acknowledgement. A glass plaque with my name was the reward. However, seeing that room full of people who understood why I did what I did and backed my decision to stand up for a youngster who needed someone was more important. Over the next 2 weeks, town heard about the tunnel incident. Mrs. Whitmore ceased attending school functions. Her pals stopped calling. Parents who used to drink coffee with her changed their minds. Another teacher told me she had taken her daughter out of school and relocated to a place an hour and a half away where no one knew what she did. Some muttered that they felt sorry for her. Everyone makes errors under pressure. Most people felt she caused it by never apologizing or saying she was wrong about how she handled Eli throughout the crisis. The school rapidly carried on without her. 3 weeks after the rescue, Principal Lawson brought me into her office. A job offer letter was on her desk. I could teach next year if I wanted. She asked me because I had the moral leadership that produces outstanding teachers, those who always safeguard their children. The papers was signed the same day. The other employment offers paid more and had newer structures, but this community was eager to grow and change, which mattered most. Our 7th grade end-of-year celebration was in the gym on Friday afternoon. Parents crowded the bleachers as youngsters sat in folding chairs facing a tiny stage. Eli approached the microphone frightened, yet determined. Friends helped him practice his speech for weeks. He described the tunnel collapse and his fear when he got sick. He said sharing his meal was right, even if he was hungry. Then he uttered what caused half the crowd to cry. He thanked everyone who defended him when Mrs. Whitmore requested his rations. He said he learned that true friendship includes sticking up for others, even when it's hard, and that compassion counts more than money, parents, or neighborhood. The gym was hushed as he talked. Eli finished and moved away from the microphone, and every 7th grader stood up and clapped. Mom and Dad stood up. In the 3rd row, Lila Whitmore wiped tears from her cheeks while clapping harder than anybody. Students changed drastically from that bus journey to now. They defended Eli with everything they had after mocking his shoes. I felt proud knowing I helped them improve even somewhat. Maria Parker threw an end-of-year party at their flat the following Saturday. All Eli's new pals and their families were invited. I anticipated 5 or 6 attendees. 25 individuals filled that modest living room. Rich parents who looked down on Eli's neighborhood ate handmade tamales and laughed on the couch. Kids went about playing hallway games. Eli was in the midst, beaming larger than ever. His mom kept restocking food dishes and thanking guests. Nobody cared about the ancient dwelling and outdated furniture. They were just glad to celebrate Eli and the connections that built from something so horrific. I was grabbing extra napkins when Carlos Ramirez called me into the kitchen. He said Maria wept for nearly an hour when the first playdate invitation arrived. She feared for years that Eli would be lonely since they couldn't afford other things. He stated the tunnel collapse worried him more than ever. The aftermath provided Eli something he never had before: true friends who appreciated him for who he was, a community that valued him, and a place to belong. The harrowing days in the dark tunnel were worth it, as Eli laughed with his classmates in the living area. School finished on a Tuesday in early June. Last week, I thought about how 4 days in a collapsing tunnel altered this town. 12 students might benefit from the scholarship fund next year. New volunteer procedures prevented youngsters from being treated like Eli. A group of 7th graders developed empathy without a school lecture. Choosing compassion above brutality was demonstrated to them. They saw how a poor person's charity saved lives. They learnt that doing the right thing is more important than fitting in. They never forgot those teachings. I prepared for my first year as a full instructor in July. Principal Lawson phoned to say I'd teach 8th grade, bringing Eli and his friends back. I could encourage their progress. Planning classes and arranging my classroom took weeks. I was delighted and terrified every time I entered the vacant room with my name on the door. Indeed, this was happening. Being a genuine teacher with my own pupils and classroom was my goal. Eli visited my classroom after 7th grade. He gave me a card from all his pals. A light-filled tunnel was drawn on the front. Eli wrote that I taught him to stand up for himself. That genuine instructors defend all children, not just the wealthy or easy. Having someone to support you in tough times makes all the difference. I kept that card in my desk drawer for daily viewing. 4 years after our tunnel disaster, the town organized a memorial service for a previous collapse that killed 3 workers. Our group was asked to discuss survival and strength. Eli rose first, taller and more assured. He taught that courage is assisting others while you're terrified. Next, some of his students shared how the experience taught them to recognize people's character beyond money and rank. Mark Sullivan described seeing youngsters become heroes at night. I mentioned human generosity under strain, and how disaster reveals people's true selves. Nearly 180 individuals listened silently. We completed to lengthy applause. Parent after parent thanked us for sharing our experience. They believed the tunnel made their kids more loving, less materialistic, and more motivated to fight injustice. Maria Parker stood with Carlos Ramirez and watched her son shake hands and spoke to people who ignored him. That fearful, lonely youngster from the bus front was gone. The young man in his place recognized his worth and had people who respected him. If individuals learn from bad things, they can improve. Parents approached me one by one after the wedding. The mother of a bus passenger who mocked Eli clutched my hand tightly. She told me her daughter talks differently now and observes when people are left out at school and spent her birthday money on supplies on a classmate who couldn't afford them. Another dad claimed his son stopped asking for fancy sneakers and started helping at the food bank. While thanking you, their voices trembled as they revealed how terrible those 4 days were, and how thankful they were that anything good resulted from it. One woman sobbed while telling that her kids stood up to a bully last month because Eli taught them that individuals matter more than popularity. I listened to tale after story of youngsters who saw past money and prestige, became bolder and nicer, and chose empathy over cruelty. I saw daily changes the year after the collapse. Winter saw Eli's grades rise from just passing to honor. His instructors drew me aside during planning times to tell me he now participates in every topic, answers challenging questions, and volunteers to help struggling students with arithmetic. He joined the student council and created a lunch buddy program for lonely youngsters with older students. I saw him smiling at jokes and planning weekend hangouts in corridors with buddies. The nervous youngster who ate lunch alone in the library was gone. My teaching career took off unexpectedly. Principal Lawson brought me into her office one morning to inform me 4 new teachers wanted to watch my classroom. They heard I made every student feel cherished and protected and created a culture where students supported each other instead of tearing each other down. I was invited to speak at a district conference on inclusive classrooms and crisis management. Other schools copied our volunteer training program. Parents wanted their children in my class because they trusted me to treat everyone equally, regardless of income. I now understand teaching thanks to those 4 days in darkness. It goes beyond lesson plans, test results, and curricular requirements. It's about demonstrating kids' bravery in difficult and terrifying situations via your decisions. Proof that every student deserves safety, respect, and kindness, no matter what. Eli discovered his tribe and voice. These 7th graders learned empathy that transformed them. I realized I needed to be a teacher who never turned away a child in need and speaks up even when strong people tell me to be silent. My sister stole my child's name, kidnapped him, and cut me off from the family, but the choice I made triggered a downfall she never saw coming. After my emergency C-section, I found my sister altered the baby's name while I was asleep. Not being able to do anything hurt most. Although I was the surrogate, she claimed to be the true mother and vowed to name the kid after me to commemorate my efforts. I died during labor and was resuscitated before C-section. I had enough issues before that to permanently harm my physique. I was glad to give my sister her dream kid. I was freed after 3 days without visits. I texted first whether the baby was okay, and if I could be the godmother. I wanted nothing else. Sis will make it official when you visit, but not this weekend. Could be next. I asked to see Liam for 6 weeks. Finally, my sister Sophie texted, "Come to Mom's for Sunday dinner. We'll do the godmother ceremony." 3 p.m. My last $45 bought a silver rattle and I practiced my godmother speech in the mirror. Sunday morning, I woke up at 5 a.m., too thrilled to sleep, and spent 3 hours getting dressed despite my abdomen hurting with every motion. I curled my hair for the first time since before the pregnancy, and wore the only outfit that fit over my big tummy. I called Linda to inquire what dessert to bring because I'd bought ingredients for her favorite lemon bars while driving over, but her line was disconnected. Strange, maybe she forgot to pay the bill again. I tried Sophie next and received an automatic ban notice. My chest clenched as I pulled over on the highway shoulder and phoned Richard, my cousins, and Aunt Vanessa while cars zipped by. Every number was banned or disconnected, like I'd been surgically plucked from the family tree. I arrived at Linda's house to see her cherished rose plants withering after 2 weeks without water. Furniture covered in white sheets was visible through the mail slot. I drove to Sophie's flat. The landlord remembered me from prior trips and a young couple were visiting it. "Are you Emily?" He gave me an envelope with my name and Sophie's handwriting. A $4,500 check and medical bill note were inside. "This equals us. Do not contact us." The money bounced 3 days later, and through a false Instagram, I learned they'd moved to Seattle and christened Liam with Linda holding him and a stranger as his godmother. That night, I saw my scar in the mirror, a lifelong reminder of how my family destroyed me. An insurance investigator contacted 7 months after I accepted my family's free incubator use. After giving birth, I was billed $500,000, although I had insurance. The insurer did what they do best, looked for reasons to not pay. This call resulted from their inquiry. "We found our review intriguing." She continued. "Your sister had genetic testing done 6 months before the pregnancy showing positive for factor V Leiden, but she marked no family history on the fertility clinic forms." My legs gave out. I told her I was unaware of any family medical history. Her tone was grave. "This is fraud. We want the whole sum." I called physicians immediately. Tests helped me find it. Factor V Leiden, a blood clotting condition, made delivering birth fatal. Investigators' words rang in my ear. I immediately understood Sophie knew I would die during childbirth but didn't care. All she wanted was her kid. I phoned the insurance company again and they said it was still fraud but would focus on Sophie. I was too. My pro bono lawyer took my case. Civil and criminal lawsuits were brought. Her insurer sued her for $500,000, while I sued her for attempted murder. Sophie's idyllic Seattle existence collapsed quicker than she could tweet motherhood quotes. Sophie's boyfriend was caught selling narcotics out of their Seattle apartment by child services quickly. I received images of Liam at 11 months old in a filthy onesie with empty bottles on a bare mattress on the floor and the $1,800 stroller I purchased them being used to store drug money during the emergency removal. Sophie contacted me for the first time since she disappeared, weeping and unable to talk. "Avoid doing this. This is my son." I cut her off mid-sentence. After 4 months of paperwork, I was called to pick up Liam. With a full heart and an empty car seat, I flew to Seattle. Liam was crying for his mother and writhing in her arms as the social worker pulled him out. I'd felt this gorgeous kid kick inside me for months but never held. He ignored me as another stranger in a lengthy queue. I was determined to claim him. I did for 6 years. I fed, cleaned and peekabooed. Sophie was repaying the $300,000 court ordered. However, Thursday afternoon's doorbell rang. I opened it and saw Liam with his backpack, crying as he held printed images. Asking, "Why did you lie to me?" He should have been in school, so I froze. "Open! The fence woman said you snatched my actual mom." I glanced at him, unsure what to say but knowing my sister was back. When I reached for Liam's shaking photographs, I saw his backpack strap was ripped and hanging free. He had fresh red scratches on both arms like he'd been grabbed and dragged. I felt my heart pound when I saw photographs of Sophie holding Liam in a wonderful apartment. Everything was trimmed nicely to cover the police picture dirt. I knelt and tried to grab them, but Liam pulled back, his face contorted with perplexity and wrath I'd never seen before. "That lady hurt you?" I said, but he pushed away tighter, demanding to know why I snatched him from his actual mom. My hands were dialing the school while Liam remained transfixed at our doorway, his sneakers still muddy from where she took him. The secretary answered on the third ring, and I inquired why Liam was fired early without calling me. She paused, then apologized, saying Jessica Brown, his aunt, had arrived with court documents and ID. As she had waited outside the playground fence for weeks and Liam had waved at her before, they believed it was all right. My legs became limp as I hung up and called 911, reporting that my sister had abducted Liam from school with bogus identification. The operator listened, then informed me this was a civil matter for family court because Sophie was Liam's biological mother and he wasn't hurt. 2 hours later, Liam sat at our kitchen table with his mac and cheese going cold as I took pictures of his arm scratches and marks with my phone. He continued asking me why I lied, stole him from his actual mom, and never told him. Each inquiry seemed like a dagger cutting deeper as I tried to explain to a 7-year-old. I lay on the floor outside his bedroom door that night, listening to him scream himself to sleep, my C-section scar hot with stress ache. I searched for Jessica Lane on my laptop but only got a 2-week-old Facebook profile with no friends and images of Sophie at different ages. The next morning, I kept Liam home and contacted Matthew Scott, my custody lawyer 6 years earlier. When he answered on the second ring, I recounted how Sophie had contacted him despite the restraining order. He arranged an emergency hearing but cautioned it would take 2 weeks to see a judge. I examined Liam's school iPad after hanging up and found 3-week-old Mommy Sophie 2024 texts. The messages promised Disney trips, new toys, a huge house with a pool, and the truth about Aunt Emily's harm to our family. He received daily texts from her that she loved and missed him during recess when teachers weren't looking. Liam told the doctor he fell at recess when I took him to his doctor's that afternoon to document his injuries. The doctor stared worriedly at me while writing down Liam's rapid behavioral changes and contradicting injury tales in his file. 3 days later, a silver Honda followed us to the grocery store, always 3 vehicles behind, no matter how I changed lanes. I took a strange route home through side streets I seldom visited, and the automobile followed every turn. As I entered the police station parking lot, the Honda drove past without stopping, but I knew this was only the beginning. Matthew sent a stack of documents to my flat the next morning and informed me we needed to submit an emergency motion. We traveled to the courthouse, where I watched other families wait for their hearings as he filled out documents at the clerk's desk. The clerk reviewed our documents and said, "Judge Karen Mitchell had an opening in 10 days, but warned us that biological parent rights were complicated even with all our evidence." Liam's teacher phoned that afternoon, seeming apprehensive, and asked if I could meet. She stated Liam told his classmates that his true mom was coming and refused to prepare a Mother's Day card since I wasn't his mother. The time frame is confusing me. Emily nearly died carrying Sophie's kid. After months, Sophie lost Liam to Emily. Since the school counselor wanted to see me the next morning, I hardly slept worrying about it. I saw Liam's paintings on the counselor's desk before she started talking. He drew 2 houses, a phony home with stick figures that looked like us, and a genuine home with a woman he'd never lived with. The counselor showed me additional drawings of Liam using his unsteady handwriting to write about my true family and returning home soon. She advised urgent therapy but claimed the wait list was 6 weeks long and gave me childhood trauma leaflets I threw away. 2 days later, a FedEx truck arrived and the driver handed me a signature-required envelope. Nancy's Seattle legal firm sent a formal letter saying I'd won custody fraudulently and requesting Liam's immediate return. The letter indicated Sophie had finished recovery and remarried Michael Thompson, a rich businessman who could give Liam chances I couldn't. Because my hands shook, I dropped the papers and Matthew discovered me on my kitchen floor 20 minutes later, attempting to pick them up. He took the letter and called while I felt trapped. 5 days before our hearing, Matthew phoned me at midnight after researching all night and finding no Michael Thompson in any database. But he found something else. Jessica Lane claimed to be Liam's aunt for months through court paperwork. The whole affair was planned and executed with false addresses and phone numbers that looked real. Liam was packed his favorite toys into his rucksack that night. He replied he was preparing for his real house when I asked. I held him on his bed while he told me the fence woman promised him a puppy and a room with a TV and video games. She told him I was monitoring him, but now he needed to go home. The next week at Liam's soccer practice, I noticed the silver Honda in the parking lot and observed a woman get out and chat to other parents. She introduced herself as Liam's aunt and said she was worried about my mental health after the traumatic birth. Several parents looked at me differently. One mom moved her chair away from me, and another pushed her child away when he tried to talk to Liam. Matthew subpoenaed Sophie's treatment records and found she was released after 12 days for non-compliance. The prosperous businessman's spouse was Lucas Thomas, just freed from prison for fraud and identity theft. My reputation at Liam's school was already suffering even with this knowledge. 3 days later, Liam left during recess, and a teacher spotted him 2 blocks away headed toward the silver Honda parked along his path. The principal called me in to say they were instituting a safety plan that needed me to take Liam to class every morning. She stared at me like I was the problem, while stating that Liam appeared puzzled about his living circumstances. I heard one father mention custody fights are horrible for kids as I walked him in. Dr. Sarah Collins, a court-appointed psychologist, evaluated Liam 2 days before our hearing and made me wait in the corridor. I heard Liam say he wanted to meet his actual family and that I terrified him through the door. He said prepared, inaccurate phrases, but Dr. Collins kept writing on her notepad. She walked out without looking at me and said her report was ready for the judge. As I tucked Liam in that night, I noticed his blanket was lumpy around his pillow. Lifting it revealed a cheap prepaid phone with a flashing screen. I snatched it up with shaking hands and noticed dozens of calls to a Seattle number, some lasting over an hour when I thought he was asleep. After scrolling through the texts from the 20-minute call, I noticed Sophie assuring him I wasn't his true mom and that she was going to save him. I returned the phone and proceeded to my room, feeling like the floor could collapse. I informed Matthew about the phone the next morning, but he claimed we couldn't do anything without proof Sophie sent it. 3 days before the hearing, I was cooking lunch when the doorbell rang and Sophie and a stranger appeared through the peephole. Sophie yelled to see her son as I opened the door a little. Sophie shouted loudly enough for all the neighbors to hear that I was keeping a mother from her kid as Jessica, her neighbor, held up her phone to capture everything. Sophie pushed her foot in the door and yelled about how I snatched her kid as other neighbors came out with their phones to capture the spectacle. The cops arrived after I closed the door, but Sophie and Jessica were gone, and the harm was done. Matthew came over that afternoon to prepare me for court, grimacing when he said Judge Karen Mitchell favored biological parents. He informed me that Sophie's lawyer would portray me as manipulating my sister during a vulnerable period, and that my traumatic birth medical records might make me appear crazy. Liam refused to leave his room the morning of the hearing. I begged him to get dressed outside his door as he yelled that he hated me and wanted his actual mom. Once I opened the door, he was sitting on his bed in his pajamas, crying. He resisted my hug and yelled the phrases Sophie taught him. The ride to the courthouse was quiet save for Liam sniffling in the rear. Sophie looked radically different in a modest dress suit with her hair tied back and light makeup in court. Her lawyer presented Michael, her husband, as she sat holding hands with a man in an expensive suit. Sophie sobbed gently as her lawyer presented her as a recovering mother yearning to reunite with her stolen kid, and displayed images of her lovely nursery in their new house. Sophie's lawyer spoke about the mother-child link, and Judge Karen nodded with pity. Karen kept interrupting my lawyer to inquire about my medical concerns and whether I could physically care for an active child as he explained the abandonment and fraud. Karen ordered thorough custody evaluation over 60 days and supervised visitation commencing immediately after 2 hours of testimony. When Liam heard he'd see Sophie twice a week for 2 hours at a neutral place, his face brightened up, and I felt another piece of my heart. I sat in my car outside the visiting center 3 days later, listening to Liam and Sophie giggle through the window. He hadn't spoken in weeks, and it stung more than expected. After the appointment, the supervisor wrote on her clipboard how comfortable Liam was with his biological mother. Matthew informed me that evening of his investigation into Michael's history. He found Michael was Sophie's ex-dealer, Lucas Thomas, her lover, and their marriage certificate was not authentic. The court wouldn't accept forgery evidence without proof, and Matthew's investigator needed more time. Liam returned home with a luxury blazer and a bag of pricey toys after the third visitation. He informed me Mommy Sophie said he didn't have to obey my rules since things will change shortly. I told him to complete his schoolwork, but he tossed his new tablet at the wall and stated his real mom didn't force youngsters to do it. The next day, Dr. Sarah Collins requested my presence for her second examination. Liam sat across from us, repeating lines about feeling uncomfortable and confused with me as Dr. Collins typed pages of notes. He wanted to be with his true family and was afraid I would harm him as I wounded his mom. Everything was given well, and I could see Dr. Collins believed it. Following the exam, I drove Liam home silently while he gazed out the window, ignoring me. I found something stomach-churning when cleaning his room that night. Under his bed was a Seattle school brochure with Sophie's handwritten letter, "Your new school, sweetie," and a brand new uniform with tags from 3 weeks earlier. The outfit was embroidered with Liam's name everywhere. I gave Matthew images of everything and he phoned me within minutes, arguing this was a breach of the custody arrangement since she couldn't enroll him anyplace without court authorization. Liam's principal called while I was preparing breakfast the next morning to request my early arrival. When I arrived, she showed me surveillance tape from the day before of a lady trying to pick up Liam, claiming to be his legal guardian with documents. Liam painting those photos makes me question how long someone has been talking him about having a genuine home somewhere. The woman left after 20 minutes of arguing with the front desk workers. She asked for Liam by his teacher's name and recognized his classroom, which worried me most. The principal stated Jessica Lane presented proper paperwork, but something seemed odd, so they wouldn't release Liam. She was the same woman from the park who talked to Liam, so I recognized her from the tape despite the sunglasses and hair color. Matthew filed an emergency motion concerning the attempted pickup and fake enrollment paperwork. In court, Sophie's lawyer Michael said it was a misunderstanding and that I was neurotic and trying to separate Liam from his actual mother. The judge cautioned us against making harsh charges without evidence and indicated she wouldn't allow additional courtroom theater. Liam was screaming and shivering when I brought him up from visitation 2 days later. After getting in the car, he screamed at me, demanding why I killed his grandmother. He stated Sophie told him I wouldn't let Grandma see him before she died, which made her so unhappy she had a heart attack and was my responsibility. I attempted to tell Liam my mom was alive and living in Florida, but he called me a liar and a murderer and loathed me. My mom relocated to Florida but she was well and I'd just talked to her the week before, but Liam wouldn't believe me, even when I attempted to call her in the car. That week, Liam seldom spoke to me and spent much of his time in his room. I wasn't expecting what I found when I changed his linens. I was chilled by his dozens of sketches under his bed. Pictures of me with devil horns, crimson eyes, and a knife were titled, "The Liar and Evil Emily." Sophie had angel wings and a halo in every photo with titles like "My True Mom" and "The Good One." Some drawings represented me in a cage or behind bars, while others showed him, Sophie and Lucas in a huge mansion with a dog and a pool. I took photographs of everything but felt helpless because his therapist session was a month away and the court evaluator would likely conclude he was expressing his thoughts via art. Mrs. Thompson, my neighbor, knocked on my door the next day to inquire whether I was okay after receiving strange phone calls. An alleged social worker phoned her 3 times to ask me about my work and home hours and whether I ever looked unstable or furious around Liam. The caller inquired whether she'd ever heard shouting from our apartment, seen me drink or bring strange guys home, and seen Liam hungry or unclean. Mrs. Thompson said she told them I was a great mother, but the calls were awkward, so she warned me. I thanked her and contacted Matthew, who stated his investigator had found something major about Jessica. Jessica Lane was Lucas Thomas's sister Clara Lawson, who'd been released from jail 6 months earlier for identity theft and fraud. Before her prison sentence, the investigator acquired Lucas's social media images of her. Once you noticed, the likeness was clear. She vanished when they tried to serve her papers at the school location she gave. Sophie said she had never heard of Clara Lawson or Jessica when Matthew asked her about it in court. No charges were allowed without proof of linkage, the judge said. They were together at the park, so I knew Sophie was lying. Dr. Sarah Collins contacted a few days later to request my medical records from Liam's delivery, including my death and resuscitation during the emergency C-section. She said it was regular, but her voice told me otherwise. I saw what Sophie was doing then. She planned to use my near-death experience to say I had PTSD or brain damage and was unqualified to watch Liam. Matt confirmed my thoughts by saying Sophie's lawyer had filed a demand for a comprehensive psychiatric examination based on my traumatic delivery. I watched all my phone footage from when Liam first moved in that night since I couldn't sleep. Just 11 months old, he was crying in horror as I tried to hold him, trusting me incrementally over weeks and months. Videos include his first steps in my living room, his first word, no, and his first time holding him without weeping, which took 3 months. I wrote a long letter to the judge about how I'd been up all night with him through nightmares and feeding troubles, and how he'd been neglected and couldn't sit up at over a year old. I wrote about the therapy visits, specific exercises, and how his grin after 4 months made everything worth it. I had to attempt even if the letter might never be read. The next week at the visitation exchange, Lucas was beside Sophie's car and was swift to approach me as I walked Liam. He knocked me down and my knee hit the concrete so hard I saw stars. He instantly went down to help me and apologized profusely for being clumsy, not seeing me, and was I okay? Did I require aid? Other parents watched, and some seemed concerned, but Lucas's helpfulness and apologies made it look like an accident. As he helped me up, he murmured that this was nothing compared to what would happen if I didn't give up Liam. My legs trembled all the way to the car, where I waited 20 minutes to go home. 6 days later, Matthew brought me into his office and showed me a little USB disk that had been left under his door that morning. He connected it into his laptop, and Sophie's voice was plain as day, advising Liam what to say to Dr. Collins, offering him a new bike if he stated he was terrified of me, and a vacation to Disneyland if he sobbed. Matthew shook his head and said we couldn't use it in court without demonstrating who filmed it and how. Fortunately, we understood what we were dealing with. That week, Liam wet the bed every night for the first time since he was 3. When I attempted to soothe him after hearing him cry my name in his sleep, he'd push me away and scream that I wasn't his true mom. Dr. Collins wrote in her notebook during Liam's second mishap during her weekly visit. She then inquired whether any home changes were generating stress. I wanted to shout that his mother was poisoning him against me, but I shrugged and changed his linens for the 3rd time that day. Liam came home from his supervised visit with Sophie 2 days later and asked me why I didn't die when he was born. His explanation that Mommy Sophie told him God intended her to have him, but I was greedy and stayed alive even though I wasn't supposed to, that I took him from paradise, chilled me. He looked at me confused and wounded, like I was a monster who tricked death to take him from his actual mother. Matthew contacted me the next morning with a somber voice to say Dr. Collins's preliminary assessment recommended reunion with Sophie's birth mother due to Liam's clear desire and Sophie's miraculous recovery. We both understood the final report would be presented in 2 weeks and likely decide the judge's decision, even if we didn't say so. I saw Jessica again during Liam's soccer game the following Saturday. The man with a professional camera identified himself as a documentary filmmaker interested in child custody battles. They filmed me without asking and asked other parents if they'd observed any alarming behavior from me, whether Liam appeared happy, or if they'd witnessed abuse or neglect. I felt caged by the narrative as some parents answered their questions sideways. Most parents left uneasy. Matthew's investigator found Clara, Sophie's Seattle neighbor, who had images from 6 months ago showing the apartment building with a condemned notice and police tape, not the years Sophie said she was clean. Clara was afraid to testify since she'd seen Lucas's buddies arrive and go at all hours and understood their power. She provided us copies of the images and her contact data in case she changed her mind. The following supervised visit was the hardest, because Liam told me he didn't want to return home and that Sophie promised the awful judge would see the truth and let him live with her forever. I hugged him farewell as usual, but he shouted, "Don't touch me," loud enough that everyone in the visiting facility stared and the supervisor started filing her report. 3 days later, the school administrator called to inform me Liam was showing his classmates soccer practice injuries and telling them I struck him, was harsh and scary, and wanted to live with his true mom. The principal had to report it to Child Protective Services, who would promptly investigate, adding another layer of scrutiny. What causes someone to teach a 5-year-old such grim death jokes? Liam's question about Emily's delayed death. That's a lot for a child to handle. I saw a therapist for the first time since having Liam because I needed someone to chronicle my mental condition before Sophie warped it. In the beige office, I cried for 40 minutes about losing the kid I'd reared for 6 years. Having given up my body and family to have him, he was taken away by the same person who left me to die. My therapist stated that I was grieving appropriately in a very tough circumstance, but we both understood it may lead to emotional instability. 2 mornings later, a CPS inspector with a clipboard had arrived at 7 a.m. to inspect Liam's living circumstances. She went directly to his tornado-damaged room. I had instructed him to tidy up an hour earlier, and he had thrown every toy on the floor and screamed because his real mom never made him clean. Liam agreed as the investigator took images of the clutter and asked whether this was how his room typically looked. He said I never helped him clean and got upset when he asked. Too perfect timing. Too organized. Sophie must have known when to cause Liam's outburst to match with the probe. Matthew contacted me 2 days later while I scrubbed Liam's handprints from the kitchen wall. His private investigator's Lucas findings were delivered with a tense voice. Attack and possession arrests in the previous 6 months. Both accusations were withdrawn on technicalities. Something regarding witness concerns and poor search techniques. Our toughest problem was that we couldn't utilize this material in court. Matthew emphasized that family court would not admit continuous criminal histories without a conviction. I cracked my phone screen by throwing it against the wall. Liam scarcely spoke to me the next week, except to ask when he'd see Mommy Sophie again. I received Dr. Collins's report by email at work. Reading that in the bathroom stall made my hands shake as each syllable hurt deeper. She suggested gradual transfer to biological mother's custody due to Liam's desire for my possessive relationship. The sentences blurred as tears fell on my phone. Poor connection, emotional codependency, and reunion resistance. She framed 6 years of love as a crime. I left work early after vomiting in the toilet. Matthew tried to persuade the Seattle neighbor to testify about Sophie's apartment sites. She agreed to a video deposition after weeks of persuasion. I saw her describe the drug trades and neglect from Matthew's office. Then her phone rang during recording. When she returned on air, she said she was bewildered after becoming white. Nothing seemed unlawful to her. It may have been buddies visiting. Matthew closed his laptop knowing Lucas had reached her but having no proof. I discovered Liam at the kitchen table writing in his finest handwriting that night. It was hidden by his arm when I inquired, but I saw enough. Dear Santa, I want my actual family for Christmas and Aunt Emily to be happy when I go. The wonderful kid I reared remained even as my heart broke. I cried into my pillow in my room till I couldn't breathe. Sophie's lawyer filed an emergency motion 3 days later. The press said I was psychologically deteriorating and Liam was in danger. They sent images from the documentary filmmaker of me fatigued during Liam's soccer practice with dirty hair and bags under my eyes. Karen arranged an emergency hearing 48 hours later. Liam looked guilty as I spent 2 days attempting to appear put together. A tiny courtroom smelt like stale coffee and desperation for the emergency hearing. Nathan displayed Lucas's arrest records and booking images. Sophie's lawyer instantly rose, stating Lucas wasn't seeking custody, making it irrelevant. Sophie sought custody alone. Lucas was her boyfriend. Karen looked agitated, scratching her temples as she advised both parties to prioritize Liam's interests over mudslinging. She beckoned Liam into her private room. He passed me without looking up, his little shoulders tense. I imagined his falsehoods for 20 minutes, which seemed like 20 hours. When the door opened, Liam stared at the floor as Karen declared her choice. She ordered Sophie nightly visits until the final hearing next week. My lawyer grabbed my hand to stop me from sobbing. Friday marked the first overnight stay. Thursday night, Liam neatly folded his favorite Pokémon jersey and tucked Dinosaur inside his backpack. He glanced at me while zipping it and said, "Mommy told him he didn't have to come back if he didn't want to." I helped him pack his toothbrush, knowing I would never see them again. He embraced me quickly and lightly at the door, perhaps practicing letting go. His return was different Saturday afternoon. His left eye was bruised purple and green, which I noticed instantly. He stated he fell off a bike before I asked. My hands shook as I snapped phone images of the damage. When I contacted Matthew to report it, Liam screamed I lied. He stated I punched him because I was upset about the visits and bruised him. He uttered the scripted mechanical words loud enough for Matthew to hear over the phone. I realized Sophie had taught him what to say if he was harmed. Matthew phoned me 3 days later with forensic accountant news. The person spent hours searching bank data and determined that Sophie hadn't paid me the $300,000 court judgment from 6 years ago. Instead, she concealed money in bogus accounts using Clara's stolen identities from their dealings. Financial offenses were distinct from custody difficulties, therefore Matthew thought the judge wouldn't care. 2 days before the final hearing, CPS completed their investigation. The social worker contacted to say they found no proof I harmed Liam, but the custody arrangement was affecting him. Their official advice was impartial, benefiting neither party. They chronicled Liam's mental decline daily. How he went from cheerful kid to quiet. I was at work when Liam's teacher called the next morning. She reported finding $200 in his backpack after a normal check. Liam said his mother gave him money for good behavior during visits. The school reported it to CPS as grooming behavior, but the instructor stated it was too late to affect the hearing tomorrow. Liam entered my room while I packed court paperwork that night. He got on my bed and asked whether I'd still love him if he lived with Sophie. I assured him I'd always adore him. The first time in weeks he cried and grabbed me like a child. After pulling away and wiping his face, he said Sophie instructed him not to cry because it made him weak. The next morning, we drove silently to court. Sophie's lawyer went out first in court and described a reformed mother who'd lost her child to a sister who played God. He displayed supervised visit recordings of Liam laughing and playing with Sophie. He then showed me images of Liam crying in my house, carefully chosen to make me appear awful. The USB recordings from the concealed camera were delivered by Matthew next. A tech expert said Sophie coached Liam on what to say, but Sophie's counsel said it was merely a mother helping her kid express his thoughts. Judge Karen sat skeptical of both sides. Next, Dr. Sarah Collins said that Liam demonstrated allegiance struggle between two households. He needed stability, therefore she suggested Sophie because of their biological tie and Liam's request. I sat there watching my 6 years as his genuine mother be reduced to meaningless technical jargon. When called to testify, I recounted almost dying at delivery. Sophie knew about the Factor V lighten that killed my pregnancy. She left us after Liam was born, cutting all communication and moving to Seattle. However, Sophie's lawyer twisted everything during cross-examination. He made me seem unhappy about my health and envy that Sophie might have kids. Last to testify was Liam. He stood in his small suit and delivered a speech that wasn't him. While loving his aunt, he wished to live with his own mother. Sophie had practiced every phrase with him 100 times, yet it was meticulously prepared to sound mature and intelligent. Matthew concluded by arguing about manipulation, desertion, and child endangerment. Sophie's lawyer defended maternal rights and redemption, arguing that all parents deserve a second shot. Judge Karen requested a quick break to decide. I saw Sophie hugging Liam like she'd won as we left the courthouse. After Liam's tantrum, that CPS visit was too perfect for luck. How did Sophie know when to provoke him? In the restroom 20 minutes into recess, I discovered Liam sitting on the floor beside the sinks with his knees to his chest. He looked up to see his crimson, tearful face and quivering shoulders. He took my hand and held me close, mumbling that Lucas terrified him, but Mommy Sophie said he was good now. For a moment the Liam I'd raised for 6 years urged me to stop. But suddenly his body stiffened and he jerked his hand away, scurrying backwards and shook his head, insisting he didn't mean it. Not his intent. Don't tell. Matthew arrived 5 minutes later, phone in ear and face white as paper. He held up one finger to get me to wait while the other person talked. I saw his eyes widen with each syllable. After hanging up, he grabbed my elbow and took me into the hallway, checked his watch before telling me that Lucas's sister Clara, who'd been assisting them, was jailed in California for identity fraud. She was in jail offering to reveal Sophie and Lucas's plan for a bargain, but court resumed after 3 minutes. When we returned to the courtroom, Judge Karen was already seated, and Matthew stepped up to beg permission to approach the bench. Karen was upset but waved him forward with Sophie's lawyer, and I observed them have a furious dispute with hand gestures. Karen's scowl deepened as Sophie's lawyer shook his head and Matthew pointed at his phone. Finally, she called us to order and stated Matthew had sought a continuance to present additional evidence. She was upset by the delays and would only consider it with remarkable proof. Matthew detailed Clara's detention and readiness to testify about the entire plot, saying she had paperwork and recordings that proved everything. Karen reclined in her chair for a long time before grudgingly approving 72 hours and warned that this was the final postponement she would accept. That night, while cooking leftover spaghetti, I heard a hammering on my front door that rattled the frame. Through the peephole, Sophie's face was contorted in anger. Before I could retreat, she started yelling that I wrecked everything and was a jealous witch who couldn't see her happy. While she kicked the door and shrieked that she'd make Liam hate me forever by telling him I took him and lied to him his whole life, I recorded on my phone. Because I heard sirens growing closer, my neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, must have phoned the police, as Sophie kept shouting about how I would pay for this. The video captured her stating she understood how to hurt me most and that Liam would never forgive me when she was done with him. I handed 2 cops the footage and restraining order on my phone, and they cuffed Sophie on my front porch as she shouted about her rights. By midnight she was released on bond. Her lawyer called Matthew to explain the arrest was a misunderstanding and wouldn't affect custody. Matthew stated it didn't matter because the arrest report indicating her erratic conduct when cornered was in court. Lucas disappeared altogether. His phone was unplugged and his flat unoccupied when Matthew's investigator arrived. Matthew invited me to his office to study Clara's deposition the next morning. She gave them everything, including images of fake documents, recordings of coaching sessions where they told Liam what to say, and proof that Lucas was still distributing drugs and paying Sophie's lawyer. The worst aspect was Sophie's drunken laughter about not wanting to raise Liam 2 weeks before. She intended to punish me for kidnapping him. He made her think of all she'd lost, and she couldn't tolerate him. Making me suffer was worth appearing to be a wonderful mother. Clara filmed everything because she was weary of being drawn into their mess and wanted insurance in case they turned on her. A court-appointed guardian, retired teacher Mrs. Patterson, skilled in instances like these, was caring for Liam. Liam finally felt secure telling the truth without Sophie and Lucas watching. Mrs. Patterson contacted Matthew to tell that Liam had broken down over lunch and told her everything about Lucas slapping him when he missed his lines, Sophie shouting at him during visits when he didn't seem cheerful, and being confined in his room when he sobbed for me. He repeatedly wrote, "I want to go home," on pages with drawings of our former house. I saw Liam at the courts 3 days later under social worker supervision. After seeing me, he went into my arms, crying and apologizing, saying Sophie told him I'd go to jail if he said the wrong things in court. He apologized repeatedly. The man was apologetic. He didn't mean it. He wanted me to stay out of trouble. He showed me bruises on his arms from Lucas's hold and told how they had him practice his testimony every night for weeks. Sophie had used his love for me against us by promising to help him find his actual family if he loved me. Judge Karen's face was stone as she evaluated the fresh evidence when court resumed. They brought Sophie to the stand and asked her if Clara had instructed Liam to lie in court. Sophie began calmly, calling Clara a criminal who would say anything to avoid jail. Something snapped when Karen listened to Sophie's audio claiming she didn't want Liam. Sophie sprung up yelling about motherhood rights. Liam was hers by blood and could not be taken. The system was stacked against her. It took 2 bailiffs to pull her back in her seat after she shouted that I was a barren witch who stole her kid. Karen immediately demanded a psychological assessment of Sophie, not Liam, due to her concerns about her mental health and parenting capacity. After 3 hours with Sophie, the court psychiatrist diagnosed her with narcissistic personality disorder, with antisocial traits, and advised against unsupervised contact with Liam, owing to the potential of emotional manipulation and psychological injury. 2 days later, Matthew contacted me at work to tell Lucas had been detained trying to enter Canada with 2 kilos of cocaine and 3 unlicensed firearms in his trunk. Border inspectors uncovered phony passports, and Lucas's photograph didn't like Sophie's successful boyfriend from court. When Matthew told Sophie about Lucas's arrest at our next hearing, she sprang up so fast her chair flipped over and screamed at her lawyer. She dismissed him in front of everyone and told the court she would defend herself since everyone was plotting against her. Karen gave her 3 days to prepare her case. However, Sophie returned with a stack of old printed emails and texts. She brandished them around, saying they proved I coerced her to accept Liam and tricked her into using me as a surrogate. She accused Karen of collecting insurance company kickbacks and Matthew of sleeping with me. 2 court officials approached her when she shouted that I indoctrinated Liam and would testify that I beat him. She ran across the aisle at me, yelling about the money I owed her for rearing Liam for 11 months on seeing them. When the cops seized her arms, she kept kicking and spitting until they had to take her out while she yelled, "We'll pay." Sophie was handcuffed at the defendant's table an hour after Karen sought a recess. The judge quickly awarded me full permanent custody with no Sophie visits. Her permanent restraining order forbade Sophie from approaching Liam or me within 500 feet. I was surprised when she did anything. Karen faced the prosecutor in the gallery and announced she was sending Sophie's case for criminal prosecution for child endangerment, fraud, and witness tampering. Sophie gazed at the table as the judge said that Liam would be given to my care immediately and any effort to contact him would result in arrest. A week later, Liam returned permanently. But this wasn't the youngster taken 3 months ago. He continued asking Sophie to come rescue him, if she still loved him, and if he was horrible and she left. His dreams woke him up screaming every night. During the day, he followed me around like he was, I might disappear. We started seeing a parental alienation specialized child therapist twice a week. I couldn't find Liam after grocery shopping one afternoon until I heard a disturbance from his closet. He made a fort inside with every blanket and pillow he could find. I found him in the center with a flashlight and his beloved plush elephant when I opened the door. He glanced up at me and murmured that no one could find him in there, that he was secure. I took Christmas lights from the garage and helped him thread them in the fort instead of talking him out. How did Liam know to design that closet safe space? Was it something he learnt at Sophie's when things became scary? His other plush animals were brought one by one and placed around his secure sanctuary as guards. We sat in that closet fort for 3 hours without discussing Sophie, court, or anything terrifying. Reading comics by Christmas light with the world outside far away. Sophie's insurer sued for the whole $500,000 plus $150,000 in damages and legal expenses. Sophie had no defense with Lucas in federal prison for 15 years, and Clara testifying about their apartment observations. Her public defender warned Matthew she faced 3 to 5 years in state jail for the criminal counts and a lifetime civil suit. The month passed, and Liam was making gradual treatment progress when Matthew called to tell me Sophie had tried something new. She had a new lawyer write Liam a letter alleging I was poisoning him against his actual mother, and that she would always love him despite the falsehoods. After Matthew intercepted it before it reached our mailbox, Liam saw the envelope when Matthew showed me why we needed to prosecute her with postal tampering. Liam's nightmares returned, and he soiled the bed for the first time in years that night. Terrified. Liam's therapist said in our next appointment that Sophie's warped mindset makes her hurt others. She explained in simple terms that love doesn't hurt or scare, and that Sophie's actions weren't Liam's responsibility. Liam stopped wondering when Sophie was coming back because he saw the difference between true love and what Sophie had done to him. Sophie kept hurting us from jail, and I discovered she had been posting on arranged parent groups, claiming hundreds of others I had abducted her son. She accused me of bribing judges and manipulating DNA testing to take Liam and of corrupting the family court system. The postings were disseminated in echo chambers where other parents who lost custody supported her. I started receiving anonymous letters calling me a baby thief and threatening to disclose my crimes. Matthew reported each one to the police and told me they were just angry online users who didn't know the truth. Sophie had her criminal trial via video connection from county jail 2 months after the custody trial. She was charged with child endangerment, fraud, witness tampering, and assault for attacking me in court. The prosecution detailed Lucas's drug selling, Liam's living circumstances, and the bogus genetic testing documents. After a guilty judgment, the court sentenced her to 5 years in state jail with no contact with Liam until he reached 18. I watched on my laptop at home while Liam was in school. When the judge read the punishment, I was exhausted, not vindicated. After Liam arrived home from school that afternoon, I informed him Sophie was going to prison for 5 years and saw his face go through 10 emotions before he nodded and walked to his room. Next week, his therapist said Liam had wanted to write Sophie a note. Not to send, but to write his sentiments. After, he was quieter than normal and had a folded piece of paper which he discarded in the garbage at home without showing me. 2 days later, I found him in the backyard with a shovel drilling fence line holes. When I inquired what he was doing, he stated he wanted to plant something ours. After driving to the garden center, he named tomato plants, sunflowers, and a lemon tree as we planted them, carefully patting earth around the roots. He used this old watering can from the garage to water them every morning before school, inspecting for fresh growth like it was the most essential task. A few weeks later, his teacher called to tell me Liam had stopped talking about his actual mom during sharing time, and was talking about his plants and supper. Change occurred slowly over months. When he needed homework help, he called me Emily, then Aunt Emily, then Mom. We both tried to ignore it. State check for $12,000 came. Sophie's first asset seizure payout. I opened Liam's college account that day. 6 months after the experiment, I woke up to smoke detectors ringing and discovered Liam flipping rubber eggs and toasting bread. A green marker-written construction paper card for Mom on a tray. His end-of-year report came home with good grades and a note from his teacher stating he'd spoken up for a first grader being bullied instead of using his fists. He asked if we could drive past the hospital where he was born over summer vacation, and we ate ice cream in the parking lot while he glanced at the building and said, "Thank you for not dying, Mom." His voice was so soft I almost missed it. I met Mrs. Patterson in the grocery store buying cat food and she hugged me tight, telling me the neighborhood was watching us. Not all family is blood. People with casseroles and offers to watch your child are sometimes it. Liam entered 3rd grade with a confidence, writing my name on every form without prompting. In their family tree project he wrote, "Don't need one. My mom is enough." I cried in my car after pickup. His 9th birthday was a gorgeous October Saturday. We had school kids and close neighbors in the backyard. Everyone sang when Liam blew out candles on my uneven box mix cake. After closing his eyes, he claimed he wanted things to stay the same. Seeing our dirty, noisy, flawed existence filled of people who loved us. I understood Sophie would never grasp what we built. Founded on honesty, sacrifice, and showing up every day, even when it was hard, this family was not stolen or coerced. Even though we were afraid and didn't know what we were doing, Liam's garden was higher than him and full of winter canned tomatoes. I knew all we'd lost had led us to the right place, as I saw him grinning as he handed out cake to his buddies. My father uninvited me from my sister's wedding, then he called in panic when I revealed I owned every wedding vendor. I was at my home studio when my folks phoned. There are not enough seats for everyone at the wedding. Cuts had to be made, and you were among them. You understand, correct? I took a big breath, but I'd already written a speech, and my airfare cost $750. It is non-refundable. Lucas. My father's voice sliced through like a dagger. This is a formal occasion. People eat with many forks. Your sister's CEO pals will be there, and we understand that crowds make you uneasy. Dad, I'm 29. Remember to eat before you contact us back. You feel irritable when you're hungry. Beep. He hung up. My chest was filled with chilly dread. I dropped out of film school 7 years ago, and they still couldn't pretend I was important. An hour later, I received another call. It was their wedding planner. "Mr. Lucas, This is Hannah from Wedding Love. I am phoning concerning your sister's wedding next month. Your family contacted us regarding certain modifications. My stomach sank. What type of changes? They've removed you totally off the guest list, but they've also asked that we keep your $55,000 payment for the videography package. Your mother stated that the family had already earmarked those monies for other wedding expenditures. I insisted on paying for the videography package so that I could give my sister something unique. My hands were shaking now, but not out of despair. Hannah, I need to ask you something. What is the name of your wedding venue? The Horizon Estate is located downtown. Why? And who owns the property? I heard papers shifting. It is classified under Vision Media Group. My voice was steady now. How about the catering company? Silver Fork Catering, although I'm not sure why. She paused. Wait, it is also Vision Media Group. Keep going, the florist, DJ, and limousines. Her respiration quickened as I said each name. Mr. Lucas, are you telling me that I own every vendor for this wedding? Every single one. The words felt odd coming out. 7 years of making people believe I was struggling while discreetly building $1 million company in advertisements. 7 years later, you obtain a real job, and we recall what occurred at your prom as if I were still the awkward adolescent who stomped on Sarah's friend's dress. Cancel everything, I murmured gently, every contract and every reservation. Send my parents an itemized bill that outlines exactly what their actual budget should cover. They can retain my videography deposit because they've already spent it. But sir, the wedding is in 4 weeks. There are 150 guests. Then they should start making calls. After I hung up, I sat in my studio, surrounded by equipment that they dismissed as an expensive hobby. My phone vibrated with a text from Mom. Lucas, we have made our decision. Nonetheless, the invitation included a clothing code. We understand how difficult those are for you. When you obtain a real job, you'll comprehend these choices. Do not contact your sister, I typed back. Understood. Good luck with the merchants. I was retrieving film from a disk when my phone burst with calls. I didn't recognize Mom, Dad, or my sister's numbers. I allowed them to ring till Dad phoned for the 6th time. Lucas. His voice had lost all of its cockiness. He was scared and nearly screamed. Every vendor has just canceled. The location, the caterer, and everyone. There's been a catastrophic error. Make no mistake, Dad. They all work for me. The hush was so perfect that I could hear him breathing. That is impossible. You produce little videos, you are hardly able to afford. I create advertisements for Nike, Dad. Every vendor you recruited reports to me. We can figure it out. You're still family. Family? I laughed. You were scared an hour ago that I wouldn't be able to handle numerous forks. Lucas. Don't be too sensitive. You know, we only want the finest. No, Dad. You desire a wedding that you cannot afford. The phone rang again. This time it was my sister. I nearly didn't respond, but something made me pick up. Lucas. Her voice was little and broken. She was weeping so hard she couldn't talk. What's happening? Mom and Dad are yelling. The venue phoned me personally. They stated everything was canceled. My rage subsided a little. Did you know they didn't invite me? What? Number. Mom mentioned that you had a major shoot that weekend and couldn't make it. Her sobbing became louder. I closed my eyes and felt the weight of what I'd done. They also retained my $55,000 deposit. They said they'd already spent it. $55,000. Lucas. Oh my God. I did not know. All of this was new to me. She was hiccuping now. That's how Mother used to do it when we were kids. Can you put it back? What about the vendors? My voice cracked. I apologize. But they have to learn. They can't keep treating me like way anymore. 7 years of being treated as if I were a child who couldn't use forks. But this is my wedding, she murmured. I had to pick between teaching my parents a lesson and celebrating my sister's most important day. I sat there gazing at my phone screen, Olivia's sobs running through my brain like a never-ending loop. My finger lingered over Isabella's contact, and I knew that whatever I did next would permanently affect my relationship with my family. My chest was still full with heated and stinging wrath. But now it was accompanied by the sound of my younger sister wailing over a disaster she had not caused. I hit the call button before I could reconsider my decision. Isabella answered the first ring, perhaps anticipating more chaos. I advised her to wait 24 hours before issuing the cancellation notification so I could freeze everything while I decided what to do. She seemed relieved, said she'd suspend any vendor conversations, but warned me that some of them had already inquired about what was going on. I assured her I'd give her a definitive decision by tomorrow morning and hung up, feeling like someone had dropped a rock on my chest. I spent the next hour pacing around my studio, moving back and forth between the equipment racks and editing stations. My phone continued beeping on the desk, alerting me to incoming calls. I kept looking at it and seeing my father's name. 7 more attempts in 40 minutes. I let every single one go to voicemail because I wanted room to ponder without his worry or manipulation interfering with my thoughts. The studio felt different today, with all the cameras, lights, and equipment my parents disregarded as pricey toys. This equipment has paid for itself 100 times over. They had developed a business that they had no idea existed. And here I was, using it as leverage in a family conflict I never wanted to fight. Around midnight, I finally had myself listen to my father's voicemails. I sat at my desk, put the phone on speaker, and played them in order. The first one was enraged, his voice tense and accusatory, stating I was silly and childish. The second one was perplexed, wondering how this could have happened and demanding an explanation. By the fourth message, his tone had changed to anxious, even frantic, as he discussed how much money they'd already spent and how tough it would be to locate new suppliers so close to the wedding date. On the 8th try, he said we could talk about it like grown-ups because we were family, and family works things out. The irony struck me hard, coming from someone who treated me like a kid that morning and hung up when I tried to justify my travel. What struck me the most was that in none of those communications did he apologize or admit they had made a mistake. It was always about the problem I'd made, the mess I was making, not what they'd done to generate it. I erased all of the voicemails and phoned Lucas, even though it was late. He answered on the second ring, which didn't surprise me given that he was used to my unusual hours while we were finalizing assignments. I recounted the entire issue to him, from the uninvitation to the deposit to the fact that I had just threatened to ruin my own sister's wedding. He listened without interrupting, and when I finished, there was a long pause before he said, "We needed to think about the business implications, beyond just the family stuff." Lucas explained that if word spread that Vision Media Group had pulled contracts for personal reasons, it could seriously harm our reputation with other clients. He was not mistaken, and I knew it. We'd spent years creating a reputation for dependability and professionalism, and this appeared to be neither. We decided to meet first thing in the morning at the workplace to explore possibilities for protecting both my boundaries and the company's brand. I eventually fell asleep about 3:30 a.m. and awoke at 7:30 to my phone beeping non-stop on the nightstand. I received 17 new text messages, the most of which were from my mother. I browsed through them while lying in bed, watching her tactics change from message to message. The first ones were hostile, labeling me selfish and theatrical. The middle ones used guilt, claiming that I was hurting my sister's happiness and spoiling what should have been her finest day ever. The final several went further, claiming that this wasn't who they taught me to be, that families don't treat each other like this, and that I was being cruel because of wounded sentiments. The irony of the final line nearly made me laugh out loud. They didn't raise me to be successful either, but here I was operating a $1 million business they had no idea about. Lucas and I had a conference room meeting with Nathan at work that morning. Our company attorney set out all of the vendor contracts on the table and went through them one by one. He stated that legally, I had the right to terminate anything because Vision Media Group controlled the contracts. But he also said something I hadn't considered. Some of the contracts included penalty provisions that would cost my organization real money if we pulled out. We were looking at up to $18,000 in fees and missed deposits for Vision Media Group to cover, in addition to the $55,000 my parents had already invested. Nathan also cautioned me about the consequences of having a family feud spill over into corporate operations. He indicated that if I opted to reinstate the vendors, we required detailed documentation distinguishing this circumstance from typical business operations. We spent an hour discussing how to develop a written policy about conflicts of interest and contracts with family members to avoid such disasters in the future. My phone rang again while we were still in the meeting, and the screen displayed Liam's name. I genuinely liked Olivia's fiancé. He'd always been easy to talk to, and he'd never believed my parents' narrative about my work being a joke. I left the conference room to accept the call. He asked if we might meet for coffee that afternoon, just the two of us, to discuss what was going on. His voice was calm and steady, not angry or accusing, but just sensible. I said okay, and we agreed on a time of 3:30 at a coffee shop near my studio. Liam arrived right on schedule, looking exhausted yet calm. We picked a quiet corner table and I discussed the mediation approach that Nathan had proposed. He listened without interrupting and stated that he believed it was wise that Olivia needed this type of organized talk as well. He promised to speak with her that evening and get back to me. I drove back to my studio and opened my laptop to write the email requesting mediation. My fingers hesitated over the keyboard for a full minute before I began typing. I kept it brief and clear, stating that Nathan had recommended Shirley, a professional mediator, to assist us have a meaningful talk about what happened and how to proceed. I stated that I wanted to discover a route that would benefit everyone, but that we required clear communication and mutual respect to get there. I copied Olivia, my parents, Lucas and Nathan so that everyone got the same information. My finger trembled slightly as I pushed the submit button. Liam's response arrived within 5 minutes. He stated that he and Olivia were both eager to participate and appreciated my initiative. Olivia wrote a separate message 10 minutes later, expressing her relief and hope that this might help. Then I waited. My parents' response took 6 hours to arrive, just after 9 p.m. My mother had written it, and I could sense her hesitancy in each word. She stated that although this seemed excessive for a family disagreement, they would attend if it meant resolving the situation. The fact that she still referred to it as a quarrel rather than accepting what they had done, informed me precisely how much effort this would entail. I emailed all replies to Nathan and requested him to contact Shirley to schedule the sessions. He responded the next morning, stating Shirley wanted to meet with me separately before the family session. We booked it for 2 days in her downtown office. I arrived 10 minutes late for my solo session with Shirley, due to traffic. Her workplace was in a contemporary structure with glass walls and minimalist furnishings that exuded both professionalism and comfort. Shirley was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and piercing eyes that could see right through anything you were putting up. She shook my hand firmly and motioned to the chair across from her desk. She began by outlining her methodology and asking what I expected from mediation. I gave her the typical response about wanting my parents to view me as an adult and appreciate my job choices. She nodded and took a note before gazing up at me with those keen eyes and asking if I really wanted a connection with my parents, or if I was simply searching for vindication. The question impacted me harder than I anticipated. I sat there for a bit, thinking about it, before telling her honestly that I didn't know. I said that I wanted them to perceive me as capable and successful, while also acknowledging that they had injured me, but I wasn't sure whether they were capable of such a transformation. I told her about 7 years of being dismissed and treated as if I couldn't manage fundamental adult circumstances. She asked specific questions about my business, the prom event that they kept bringing up, and my connection with Olivia. By the end of the hour, I believed she had grasped the entire magnitude of the problem. She said she'd meet with my parents next, then Olivia and Liam, before we all gathered for the first group session. The first mediation session was set 4 days after I canceled the vendors, leaving only 12 days before the wedding date. I got at Shirley's office 15 minutes early and waited in my car, trying to calm down. Olivia and Liam arrived a few minutes later, and we stepped inside together. My parents were already arrived, sitting in the waiting room with their arms crossed and matching faces of distress. Shirley escorted us into a bigger conference room with a circular table, forcing us to face each other. My folks sat to one side. I sat immediately opposite from them, while Olivia and Liam sat slightly to the side. Shirley sat at the head of the table and began by establishing ground rules for courteous communication and taking turns speaking without interruption. She underlined that we were here to talk about specific actions and their consequences, not to criticize one another's characters. My father hardly let her finish before stepping in. He said that the entire thing had been blown out of proportion, and that they had made a sensible seating selection that I took too personally. Shirley raised her hand and interrupted him in mid-sentence. She advised him to focus on the facts rather than his perceptions of my behavior. When she asked him to explain the specifics of what they decided and why, he moved in his seat and looked at my mother. Then he acknowledged they didn't invite me because they were scared I'd be uncomfortable among Olivia's business ties, which would reflect negatively on the family. The words remained in the air between us. I felt my chest tighten, but I pushed myself to remain cool and ask him directly what he meant by reflect poorly. He struggled through an explanation about formal gatherings, social expectations, and knowing what to say. My mother rushed in to support him, claiming they were attempting to shield me from an unpleasant scenario similar to the prom event years before. Shirley inquired about the prom incident, and I had to explain that when I was 17, I accidentally trod on my date's friend's dress and tore it. My parents supposedly used that against me for nearly a decade as proof that I couldn't handle formal social situations. Olivia's voice pierced through the tension, shaky yet forceful. She stated she had no clue they were still obsessed with prom, and that using a teenage mistake to explain not. Inviting me to her wedding was ridiculous. Liam instantly backed her up, pointing out that his family had never raised any reservations about my attendance, and that my parents appeared to be projecting their own anxieties onto the issue. Shirley switched the subject to the $55,000 deposit, and I noticed my mother's face turn pale. She attempted to explain that they viewed it as family money contributing to a family celebration, and that they had previously allocated those amounts to the venue improvements and culinary additions. I kept my voice calm as I explained that it was my money from my business, given as a particular gift for videography, and they had no right to reroute it without my permission. My father became protective, claiming that if I was truly successful, I wouldn't miss $55,000. Shirley asked him how he would feel if $55,000 was taken from him without his permission, regardless of his financial status. He had no decent explanation for it. The stillness stretched uncomfortably, yet it seemed essential. We spent the next hour discussing each individual point of hurt and misunderstanding. Shirley maintained our attention on specific activities, rather than character assaults. My parents began to admit some of their mistakes, but they continued to excuse everything with their intentions. Shirley emphasized that effect is more important than goal, and that their actions wounded me regardless of what they intended to accomplish. By the end of the session, we hadn't settled anything solid, but Shirley had persuaded my parents to commit to a second session and to seriously consider my situation. She assigned them homework to write precisely exactly what they did that was harmful and what they might have done differently. She also assigned me homework, which included writing down what a feasible way ahead looked like and what I was ready to compromise on. We all walked out of her office without speaking, and I waited in my car for 10 minutes before starting the engine. I drove home on autopilot, my hands holding the wheel more tightly than required. Back in my studio, I picked out the homework project Shirley had given me and gazed at the blank sheet for almost 20 minutes. The question was straightforward, but I kept going around it. What did I genuinely want out of all this? I began writing, and the words flowed faster than I anticipated. I wanted people to perceive me as someone who mattered. Not as the awkward prom kid who couldn't handle formal meals. The wedding itself seems almost beyond the point now. It was about whether my parents could recognize me as an adult with a respectable work and life. I outlined my conditions in bullet points. A real apology that admitted what they had done wrong. A repayment plan for $55,000 that includes exact figures and dates. A vow to treat me with basic respect in the future, which meant no more remarks. About my profession or capacity to function at formal gatherings. I stared over the list and felt a settling in my chest. These were not unreasonable expectations. They were just boundaries that every adult earned. The next day, I went over the list 3 times, ensuring sure each item was clear and explicit. I did not want vague pledges to do better. I needed tangible acts that they could really carry out. By the second mediation session, I had printed out my homework and marked the important passages. Shirley's workplace seemed different this time. My parents came just on time, both carrying files that were strangely prepared. We took the same seats as previously with the same anxiety in the air, but something had changed somewhat. Shirley began by asking my parents to share what they had written. My mother went first, bringing out numerous handwritten pages that astonished me. She had truly thought about this. She stated the uninvitation without attempting to soften it or make excuses. She wrote about taking the deposit without requesting permission, which was improper regardless of their intentions. She included critical comments about my profession, comparisons to Olivia's CEO buddies, and repeated reminders of prom as if I were still 17. Her voice trembled slightly when she read, and I could see her hands shaking on the pages. My father's list came next, and it was substantially shorter. He typed it on his phone, and the wording was sloppy, but he did admit that they should have consulted me before finalizing wedding plans. He stated that they had formed assumptions about my business without asking any questions. His speech was more defensive than my mother's. Lots of language like, in hindsight, and perhaps we could have. But at least he said something. Shirley allowed the stillness to stay for a time after they had finished reading. She then asked them specifically what they could have done differently in each case. My mother spoke first, her voice steadier now. She claimed they should have been open about their worries rather than making up reasons like large productions and seating arrangements. She revealed that they were concerned about being judged by Olivia's professional group and that they had pushed their concerns onto me rather than dealing with it directly. She mentioned how they had formed a vision of the ideal family in their minds, and I didn't match that image because I dropped out of film school. My father said, after a long pause, that they should have inquired about my business rather than presuming I was struggling. He hesitantly admitted that they'd always saw me as the awkward adolescent from prom rather than the adult I'd grown into. He added that they had never truly updated their mental image of who I was. Shirley agreed and took notes before asking them why they believed shifting that mental picture had been so tough. My mother's remark astonished me. She said that they had become accustomed to being ashamed about me. And habits are difficult to break, even if you know they are incorrect. I read my assignment next, my voice seeming calmer than I felt. I said that I needed them to see my career as real and to cease making comments that undercut my accomplishment. I reviewed some of the key customers I'd dealt with in recent years. Nike commercials that ran during primetime sporting events, Apple product launches that millions of people viewed, and big ad agencies that paid six figures for my services. I noticed the amazement on their expressions as I named these names. They really hadn't known. I also described what $55,000 meant to me. However, it was not all about money. It was my way of telling Olivia that I was thinking about her and wanted to make her day memorable. Having it stolen without a word was like being eliminated from the family. Like my input was meaningless since I didn't matter. My voice cracked slightly at the last part, but I kept going. I told them I'd spent 7 years constructing something genuine, and they treated me as if I was playing with costly toys. I'd let people think I was suffering because I didn't want to face their judgment. But it was my error. I should have sought recognition rather than concealing my accomplishment. Olivia began weeping before I finished reading. Her shoulders shook with sobbing. Not the peaceful ones she had shed before. Liam handed her tissues, and she attempted to gather her thoughts, but the words came out broken anyhow. She apologized for not sticking up for me before. She said she was so intent on preserving the peace and managing our parents' expectations that she had no idea how horribly they were treating me. She acknowledged she had heard the remarks about my profession throughout the years, but she ignored them as ordinary parental behavior, not realizing how much they totaled up. Liam wrapped his arm around her and talked straight to my parents. He stated that they wanted to make things right and were prepared to scale back the wedding greatly if it meant I was included and valued. He added that his own parents had been concerned about the size and expenditure from the start. They'd rather have something little and intimate. Anyway, Olivia nodded against his shoulder and stated that she had never wanted a large wedding in the first place. That had been our parents' vision, not her own. My parents appeared to have been smacked. My mother's face became pale, and my father shifted in his seat uneasily. Shirley waited until the timing was right to speak. She gently pointed out that their obsession with appearances seems to be at the heart of most of this dispute. The huge wedding was all about dazzling guests. Uninviting me was to avoid embarrassment. Taking the deposit was about sustaining the image they wished to present. She asked them outright if their friendship with me was more important than impressing Olivia's CEO buddies. My mother replied yes instantly, her voice strong. My father waited a while to respond. He stared at me, then at Olivia, and then back at Shirley. He finally replied yes, despite his stiff jaw. Shirley took note and inquired about the practical implications. What aspects of the wedding were they willing to modify in order to promote family bonds above appearance? The stillness stretched out awkwardly, and I could see my parents exchanging looks and engaging in some sort of wordless communication. We spent the remainder of the session working out concrete answers. Nathan joined us by phone, his voice coming through Shirley's speaker with the same professional serenity he usually had. He guided us through the repayment plan alternatives, detailing the various structures and deadlines. We agreed on $55,000 paid back over 2 years via a formal promissory note, with 30 monthly installments of around $1,800 each. Nathan said that this separated the gift and control aspects. They couldn't claim it was family money if they were legally obligated to repay it. The promissory note would be a legitimate contract with actual repercussions if they failed to pay. My mother looked unhappy as Nathan explained the requirements, but she consented. My father asked a few inquiries regarding interest rates and payment schedules in an attempt to negotiate better conditions, but Nathan immediately shut that down. This was not a corporate transaction where they could haggle. This was making up for what they had stolen without authorization. Nathan outlined the legal repercussions of failing to pay a promissory note amongst family members, and my father signed off on it. For the wedding, we decided that I would be treated as a complete guest, with no limits or special requirements. I wouldn't deliver a formal speech since I didn't want the pressure, nor did they. But I would be treated just like any other family member. Olivia spoke up, saying she wanted me at the head table close to her and Constantine. My parents consented without much argument, which seemed like significant progress. My mother even proposed that I sit between her and Olivia so that we could all be together. I appreciated the gesture, even though I knew it was largely to preserve the family image Mom valued so much. But at least this time, the picture included me rather than excluding me. The larger difficulty turned out to be the vendor dilemma. Lucas attended the conference via Shirley's laptop. His face filled the screen with the same intense expression he had when dealing with operational issues. He described the difficulties of resetting everything with only 7 days to the wedding. Some merchants had already scheduled alternate events within those time slots after I canceled. The florist had booked a business function. The DJ held a Sweet 16 celebration. The backup photographer had another wedding. We'd need to locate substitutes for at least 3 big vendors, probably 4, depending on the limo company's schedule. Lucas believed that we could recover around 70% of the original design, although some concessions would be required. The time frame was severe, and certain things were simply impossible to duplicate. He opened a spreadsheet that indicated which vendors were available and which were not, color-coded by priority level. My parents appeared concerned as Lucas went through each thing. Olivia stunned everyone when she interrupted Lucas in the middle of his explanation. She stated that she wanted to utilize this as a chance to scale back to the wedding she truly desired. Her voice was firmer now, not as wobbly as before. She and Constantine had discussed this and reached a conclusion jointly. They planned to reduce the guest list from 150 to 80 individuals, focusing on close friends and family rather than business acquaintances or distant relatives they knew little about. They intended to relocate from the enormous Horizon Estate ballroom to the smaller garden venue on the same site. This would make the vendor issue considerably easier because the garden site had a different schedule and required less services. It would also drastically lower expenditures, resulting in less financial hardship for everyone. Constantine instantly backed her up, saying that the adjustment will ease his parents. They'd been concerned about the cost and formality since the beginning. A smaller, more private wedding seemed appropriate for both of them. Shirley turned to my parents and asked them directly whether they could accept Olivia's decision, even if it went against their expectations. The hush dragged on for what seemed like forever. My mother's hands were tightly folded in her lap, and she kept glancing at my father, as if she were waiting for him to speak first. Finally, she responded yes, quietly but clearly. My father took much longer to respond, and when he did, his face looked as if he had just eaten something terrible. But he nodded in agreement. Olivia let out a breath I hadn't realized she'd been holding, and Constantine gripped her palm. Shirley took notes on her pad and stated that she would collaborate with Lucas to arrange the improvements. She then concluded the discussion by telling everyone that this was progress, and that we should recognize it. Lucas called or texted me every couple hours with updates for the following 4 days, so my phone was practically always in my hand. He had his entire crew working on restructuring things, and it was chaotic but in a positive way. The sort where you can see everything coming together. The garden location at Horizon Estate was available, which was ideal because it was far more manageable than the big ballroom. Xavier got the florist back first since they had merely accepted a minor corporate position that allowed them to roam about. The DJ decided to uphold the original contract when Xavier explained the issue and offered a discount on future bookings. The photographer was difficult because she had already committed to another wedding on the same day, but Xavier found a replacement who had even better evaluations. The caterer was the only complete loss since they had scheduled a large anniversary celebration. But Xavier discovered an outstanding substitute that Olivia preferred. When he showed her their menu, she was ecstatic with the unique selections available, things like fusion appetizers and unique beverages that the original caterer never proposed. I met with Isabella 3 times that week to completely recreate the videography package. She had all of the original plans, but I told her I wanted to manage the shoot myself rather than sending one of my regular teams. She looked astonished and asked if I was certain because it was family, and things might become tricky. That's exactly why I wanted to handle it myself, because this wedding had gone from being just another celebration to something far more significant. Olivia attended one of these sessions, and we spent the entire day talking over shot lists. She informed me about the most important events for her, such as the first glance with Liam, her mother assisting with the veil, and the toasts during dinner. She continued repeating she couldn't believe I was doing this for her, and I kept assuring her that was what I had planned to do from the beginning, before everything went wrong. My parents sent out the updated guest list, along with a note about trimming back to a more personal event. I saw the email since they copied me, and the phrasing was guarded, as if they didn't want to confess they made a mistake the first time. My mother contacted me the next day, and I could see she was worried about what people might say. Then she said something that astonished me. She claimed Olivia had made the correct decision, and she was not going to argue with her about it. Later that week I caught her on the phone with one of her friends discussing the adjustment, and she seemed pleased of Olivia for understanding what she wanted. It was strange hearing my mother speak in that manner because she typically needed to control everything. But perhaps Shirley's mediation was effective. My dad contacted me 4 days before the wedding, and this time it wasn't about logistics or vendor issues. He inquired about the state of my business, and although I attempted to respond quickly, he declined. He wanted to fully comprehend what I accomplished. So I described how Vision Media Group operated, how I had built up the vendor network, and what kind of commercial projects I worked on. He listened without interrupting, which may have been a first for our relationship. Then he stated that he had never understood my job and had formed assumptions based on his lack of knowledge in the business. He claimed that commercial filming consisted solely of creating YouTube videos or photographing weddings for a low cost. I told him about the Nike commercial and the Apple project, and he kept insisting he had no idea, as if he couldn't believe his kid had created something so successful. It wasn't a full apology, but it was the first time we'd had a serious discussion about my profession in 7 years. I awoke 2 days before the wedding to a long email from my mother. I read it on my phone before getting out of bed. I read it twice more because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She wrote about how she and my father had been so preoccupied with projecting the ideal family image that they had lost sight of what was truly important. She said they had viewed me as a problem to be solved rather than a kid to be cherished. She admitted that they had made mistakes concerning my career, uninvited me, and taken my money without asking. She stated she wanted to do better in the future and hoped I would give them the opportunity to show it. When I read it, I felt something in my chest relax. Like a knot I'd been holding for years, it finally started to unravel. We held the rehearsal the day before the wedding in the garden site, which was lovely. The setting was intimate and personal in a manner that the large ballroom could never have been. Flowers were already being set up, and the natural light shining through the trees made everything appear gentle and pleasant. My parents arrived looking worried, but they were trying. I could see it. They made no comments regarding the lower size or attempted to suggest adjustments. My father really helped Constantine decide out where everyone should stand during the ceremony. Then he joked about me knowing how to use all of the forks at supper. And for once, it did not feel cruel. It seemed more like he was attempting to admit how ridiculous his fears had been. That evening, the immediate family went to eat at an Italian restaurant near the site. Olivia was more calm than I had seen her in months, as if a weight had been removed from her shoulders. Liam continued praising everyone for being accommodating to the modifications, while my parents kept reiterating it was Olivia's day, and they simply wanted her to be happy. They were quieter as usual, not dominating the conversation as they typically do. My father asked me about a project I was working on and genuinely listened to my response. My mother inquired about my equipment and was genuinely interested as I described the differences between the cameras I used. Sophia drew me aside as I walked to the restroom and told me Olivia had been so much happier since the wedding plans altered. She had previously been anxious and unhappy, but now she was eager about being married. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived to the garden site at 6:30 to set up my camera equipment. The sun was just about to rise, and the light was ideal. That warm golden tint makes everything appear lovely. I wandered about examining angles and arranging photos as Lucas's team did the final touches on the flowers and table decorations. The setting looked wonderful with its natural light and plants. Lucas arrived at 7:30 with coffee and joked about this being the most high-stakes shot. It wasn't simply about I've ever done photographing a wedding anymore. It was about showing my family what I was truly capable of. My parents arrived at 9 o'clock, and my mother immediately went to inspect the flower arrangements and table settings. She continued altering centerpieces in tiny increments and questioning Lucas's staff if the seats were properly situated. However, her voice sounded different than normal, less dominating, and more like she needed to accomplish something with her hands. My father spotted Constantine in the groom's suite and spent 20 minutes assisting him with his boutonniere, making jokes about how he had worn his sideways at his own wedding. I videotaped part of it through the window, not the polished views I'd use in the official video, but the candid moments that showed them attempting to be normal. Constantine chuckled at something my father said, and my father touched him on the shoulder, making it appear as if my father was having a discussion with someone, rather than acting for an audience. I kept the camera rolling while my mother fixed Constantine's tie and complimented him on his appearance. And as she went away, I noticed her frantically wiping her eyes, as if she didn't want others to see. These seemingly insignificant instances felt significant, as if they demonstrated that we were all capable of being kind to one another once we stopped thinking about looks. Olivia emerged from the bridal room at 9:30, and my mother lost it instantly. Before Olivia could even make it through the threshold, tears streamed down her cheeks, and she continued exclaiming how beautiful her baby was while trying not to smear her makeup. I grabbed my camera and filmed my mother assisting with the veil, her hands shaking slightly as she adjusted the cloth and tucked a strand of Olivia's hair back into place. There was something gentle in that moment. Something that made me wonder whether, below all of the status anxiety and control difficulties, my mother really cared about us in her own messed up way. Olivia attracted my attention as my mother fumbled with the veil and smiled at me. "This genuine," I chuckled, but he was not mistaken. Cheerful smile reminded me of when we were children. My father entered in the doorway and simply stood there staring at Olivia for a long time before saying, "She looked perfect." He spotted me shooting, and instead of making a joke about my working at my own sister's wedding, he simply nodded. It wasn't quite approbation, but more of a recognition that I was doing something worthwhile. He could see it now. The ceremony began at 10 o'clock, and it was wonderful in terms of simplicity and personalization. 80 people filled the outdoor space without overcrowding, and everyone could see and hear everything that transpired. I strolled between the rows with my camera, photographing how the dawn light filtered through the trees and illuminated Olivia's clothing. Constantine's tears streamed down her cheeks as she walked down the aisle. The way both sets of parents were sobbing out. This is what I do at work. Filming and beautifying people's crucial moments. However, today seemed different because my people, family and sister were getting married. I captured images of Sophia straightening Olivia's train and wiping away her own tears. Constantine's parents held hands during the vows. My father reached over to grasp my mother's hand when Olivia responded, "I do." Every frame was more important than any Nike commercial I'd ever done because this was the day my family began to perceive me as someone important. The event went into the garden pavilion, where guests ate, danced and rejoiced as I continued to shoot. Around midday, my father stepped up to deliver a toast, and I almost put down the camera because I wasn't sure I wanted to film what he was going to say. But then he began talking about both of his children and their successes, giving our real names and explaining our true jobs. For the first time, he specifically identified Vision Media Group. He said he was happy of Olivia for pursuing a profession in finance, and of me for establishing a successful production business, and that both of his children had selected spouses who supported their goals rather than attempting to modify them. It wasn't a complete apology for all that had transpired, and he didn't mention the wedding fiasco or the years of discounting my work. But it was an improvement. He was there in front of 80 people, claiming me as his successful son rather than denying my existence. And that meant something. I kept recording despite the fact that my hands were shaking somewhat. When he finished and everyone applauded, he looked directly at me and lifted his glass. Later in the evening, as things were winding down, Olivia took my arm and drew me away from the crowd. She told me she was glad I hadn't given up on the wedding or the family, and that seeing me establish limits showed her she could do the same. She said that this is why she felt strong enough to cut down to the wedding she really wanted rather than the spectacle our parents were organizing. We hugged, and I realized that maybe there was some good to come out of this catastrophe. She had discovered her voice and learned to say no to things that did not benefit her. And I'd discovered that I didn't have to tolerate being treated as a child simply because we were related. This calamity had forced both of us to mature slightly. As the reception ended, my mother approached me and asked if we could speak quietly. We went away from the pavilion and down the garden path, and she told me she had been thinking about how they had treated me over the years. She said that she and my father had been clinging on to an outmoded idea of who I was, seeing me as the awkward adolescent from prom, rather than the adult I'd grown into. She realized it wasn't fair to me or our relationship, and she wanted to start again with regular dinners where they listened rather than lectured. Her speech was subdued, and she kept staring at the ground rather than at me, as if she was embarrassed to speak all of this aloud. I told her honestly that I was willing to try, but it would take time to re-establish trust. The uninvitation and deposit problem were not unique events. They were part of a 7-year-long habit of contemptuous behavior. Every statement about obtaining a real job, every comparison to Olivia's CEO pals, and every time they treated my profession as a pastime rather than a company had contributed to this wall between us. She nodded, saying she understood and that she and my father were committed to doing the work through ongoing mediation sessions with Shirley. It wasn't a miraculous reunion in which everything instantly turned great, but it was a solid foundation for creating something better. The next week, I received a message on my phone indicating funds had been placed into my company account. I examined and found $3,000 with the remark, "First installment of 30. My parents had made their first payment on the repayment plan without my reminding them or sending Nathan after them, which felt substantial. I conveyed the message to Nathan, who acknowledged receipt and modified the promissory note in our files. Lucas noticed the email correspondence and joked about having all family members sign contracts before any future contacts. And truthfully, it wasn't the worst notion I'd ever heard. Perhaps putting everything in paper would require everyone to be explicit about expectations rather than making assumptions. 3 weeks after the wedding, I completed editing the movie and headed to Olivia and Constantine's apartment to give it. They sat on their couch and watched the entire event, while I stood anxiously near the door. And toward the end, they were both in tears. Olivia thought it was great that I had captured the essence of the day and made it lovely without being artificial. She shared several clips on social media that weekend, with a remark about how private weddings were preferable than large productions. And some of her CEO pals noted that they wished they had done something similar instead of the large festivities they had planned. Liam sent me a long note thanking me for the video and for making the wedding possible at all. We had another family meal a month after the wedding, but this time it was at my studio, allowing my parents to view my workstation. I gave them a tour of the equipment, editing bays, and the little soundstage we utilized for certain shots. They continued asking questions about how things worked. Then I showed them some of my commercial work, including a Nike commercial that was carried nationwide on sports channels. My father kept exclaiming, "You made this," as if he couldn't believe that his son had developed something that was being displayed to millions of people. My mother asked extensive questions regarding the production process, such as how many people were on site, how long it took to film and edit, and how the client approval process worked. It was odd to see them engaged in my work after years of dismissing it as creating small films. But I tried to answer everything honestly and show them what my job truly entailed. They remained for 4 hours, looking at various projects and asking questions. And after they went, my father shook my hand and said he was impressed. It wasn't everything I had hoped for from them, but it was more than I had previously received. At dinner we put up my laptop on the table and spoke with Shirley for our first follow-up. She arrived on screen with her notes and inquired about how everyone was doing with the agreements reached during the mediation. My parents sat stiffly at first, and my father cleared his throat before revealing that they were still adjusting to seeing me as a successful company owner rather than their child who dropped out of film school. My mother added that it was difficult to overcome old habits, but they were trying to catch themselves when they made disrespectful comments. I told Shirley honestly that I was still dealing with years of feeling invisible to them, that the hurt didn't magically go away because we had some good discussions, but I could tell they were trying, and that was important. Shirley agreed and went to her calendar, setting monthly video check-ins for the following 6 months so we could measure progress and address any backsliding before it became a major problem. After the call, my father helped me clear the dinner dishes without asking, which seemed like a minor but major change. Olivia and Constantine returned from their honeymoon in Costa Rica 3 weeks later, and they invited the entire family to see their images. They'd stayed at this lovely environmental resort right on the beach, which they could really afford because we'd drastically reduced the wedding budget. Olivia was showing us images of their private villa and the ziplining trip through the rainforest, and she seemed more calm than I had seen her in months. Constantine checked his phone for texts from wedding guests, and Olivia read a few aloud about how people were telling them it was the finest wedding they'd ever attended to because it seemed so personal and genuine rather than like a business affair. My parents sat on the couch listening, and my mother said she loved the smaller wedding more than she expected since she was able to have genuine talks with individuals rather than making small chat with a large throng. My father nodded, and I could see they were finally understanding that reducing the guest list had been the right decision, even if it wasn't what they had hoped for. 3 months after the wedding, I signed a large contract with a luxury vehicle company to photograph their full spring campaign. The budget was more than anything I'd done previously, and I asked my parents to attend one of the shoot days. They arrived at the downtown site, which we had closed up for 2 blocks to film, and I could see their expressions alter as they saw me oversee a crew of 15 people putting up lighting and cameras and working with the client's creative team. My father stood off to the side, taking it all in, and when the brand's marketing director arrived to discuss shot angles, my father introduced himself and stated that he was my father. The director's face lighted up as she began discussing how satisfied they were with my prior work and how competitive the bidding process had been for this campaign. My father's countenance swung between pride and apparent discomfort. And I could tell he was contemplating how incorrect he had been about my profession all these years. After we finished for the day, my parents lingered to ask questions regarding the production timeline and editing process. And my father kept remarking how professional everything looked, as if he couldn't believe this was actually my work. Several weeks later, at our most recent family meal, my parents brought a wrapped box and placed it on the table in front of me. I opened it and saw a framed photo from Olivia's wedding, one I took at the reception, of all of us together, smiling and calm. My mother's voice was calm when she said they wanted to remember this as a watershed moment for our family. When we decided to be honest with each other instead of pretending everything was all right. She stated that there were still difficult occasions where old tendencies emerged. My father almost said something negative about my job, and she caught herself attempting to maintain everyone's image. But we were creating something more tangible than what we had previously. Something based on genuine respect rather than preconceptions and past wounds. After that, I kept the framed portrait on my studio desk. A reminder that the respect I had strived for was slowly becoming a reality. And it was enough for now.